So there's just... Good evening. Welcome to the October 19th regular meeting of the school board. I had my other one up. I got
October 19th.
doing too many things at once here. Good evening. Welcome to the November 16th regular meeting of the Edina School Board. We do have a quorum this evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is our approval of minutes. We had a work session and a closed session on October 19th, a regular meeting on October 19th, a work session and closed session on October 26th, special and closed section on October 30th, and a special and closed session on November 9th. You had a motion to bring those minutes to the floor?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve those minutes as presented. Any additions, corrections to those minutes as written? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as listed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up is our recognition. Rick, you want to walk us through the agenda before we go there?
I certainly do. We do have, we've had some board meetings since the October regular scheduled meeting, several closed sessions around land negotiations and work agreement negotiations. The other area that we've been dealing with as a board is continues to move forward on our construction planning around the schematics at our high school, middle school, elementaries, and also our outdoor facilities. So you can see through the process, we've had a variety of them. We've also approved the election results from November 9th, and we've had a discussion on the school calendar. That'll be discussed further tonight. As far as the agenda tonight, we will do some recognitions, and we have some hearings from the public, so we'll make sure we do that. We have consent agenda items, all very routine items that we'll talk about as we move through the consent agenda. We do have some report and discussion items around student enrollment policies. We have a guest legal counsel, Kevin Rupp, will be joining us. We have some other policies. The board has been working very closely with the administration and the district calendar committee on school calendars as we look to the future. We'll also get an update from our architects on some of the schematic drawings and the infrastructure improvements occurring in the district as we continue with that. The action items tonight will be around the world's best workforce. This is a state report that the district has completed, and we'll be giving the board a brief update. We also will be taking a look at a student information system purchase. This is a major purchase for us as we look to the future to make sure we have a software system that aligns well with our desires. And finally, some action on some policies that were reviewed previously as a school district. That would take care of the evening for us. We have two modifications I'd like to call attention to the board. Under the consent agenda item 5G, would like to table that agenda item. That is related to a nursing care contract, and we just want to make sure that that language is tight, and so we've asked the board to pull that tonight. Also, item 7B, the contract as it relates to Infinite Campus, the board did have included in their folder tonight modification in that work agreement, which we'll address. Again, that's a modification on section 7B, and those would be the two modifications in the agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Dressen. Can I get a motion to amend the agenda this evening to reflect those changes?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions regarding those amendments to this evening's agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting those amendments to this evening's agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And now we're on to our recognitions. Rick.
I'd like to call Mary Hyman forward. Mary is our district health coordinator, and earlier this year she was named the Minnesota School Nurse Administrator for 2015, a great honor, and Mary, congratulations on that award, recognized by your peers. I think anytime a peers recognize you for your award, it really is very deserving. We also as a district recognize your great services. But let's talk about your work a little bit. You went into the world of healthcare, and yet you've kind of moved into that leadership coordinator role. How do you see that passion you first had around healthcare and leadership? How does that blend together and really brings your passion out?
I've always been in
pediatrics, so it's kind of evolved into school health. And it morphed from working in a clinic situation for kids with special health care needs to it fits really, really well into the school scenario or school situation. And a lot of people might not understand the acuity and the depth of the role of that the school nurse provides for all the students in the school district. So that's been how it's transitioned for me.
And this isn't your first district, Mary. You worked in Minneapolis as well.
That's right.
And again, how do you see the role of education and healthcare, how that comes together and the important role? What are any tips you have for families out there to make sure that we can really maximize that learning experience for our scholars?
Well, to start, last August when I was in the workshops, there was one of the presenters that mentioned Alvin Toffler. I think he's a Forbes magazine editor, and he said that illiteracy in the future is not going to be just the lack of ability to read or write. It's going to be if you cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so I challenged our health staff that we've got to continue to figure out ways that classroom teachers, community, and the health needs of the students. And therefore, academically, they're going to be more successful. So it's always that mantra of, healthy students, better outcomes.
Great. Mary Hyman, congratulations. I want Chair Meyer to recognize you at this point.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Nice pictures so we can display, show your face around the district.
That's right.
That was cut
That's
me
right.
off. 1, 2, 3. Congratulations.
And at this time, I'd like to call Coach Paulson, Coach Forster, and the Edina girls tennis team forward for their annual event. So we have been winning state championships longer than you guys have been alive in consecutive. That is an amazing story. How about if we just talk a little bit about the season, if we can, if we could just go down to, as maybe a highlight that you had in the season. So if you could give name, grade, and a highlight that you had on the season as you looked back on a very, very successful season.
Okay, I'm Katie Engelking. I'm a senior this year, and so this being my last season, it was really special to, I don't know, I think while like all the times on the court have been super fun, all the things we do outside of tennis, like the sleepovers and the pasta dinners and the jams in the car and stuff like that are always my favorite, and so I think those are probably the highlight of my season.
Great.
Hi, I'm Hannah Hankinson. I'm a senior, and I would say that my highlight this year is just continuing to do all of the traditions that we do and the team bonding and everything.
Hi, I'm Asst. I'm a senior, and my highlight is probably the camaraderie that our team has. We have like a really strong bond with all like the things we do outside of the like tennis season as well.
I'm Brooke Grudel. I'm a senior, and for me, like the team camaraderie is like the biggest part. Like, yes, it's fun to win and like play on the court and stuff like that, but the stuff that's like the best is like all the team stuff that we get to do as a team and like bonding. So that's my favorite.
I'm Shaylin Rieger. I'm in 8th grade, and the highlight of this season was probably just to see how our team has evolved throughout the season and like through the traditions, and yeah.
Great, great. And Coach, what makes it click? I think we kind of heard the story, didn't we? Has this been your magic? Really, it's about the relationship in the team?
It's a big part of it, but these girls spend a lot of time during the off season, especially, and putting in time and effort and hours on the court to make it work. And then they usually come through in the state tournament. That's their most fun time of the year, I think. So that's pretty special.
Coach Forster, how about you? You were at the at the state tournament, and it was with Prior Lake Savage. It was a back and forth match. It could have gone either way. What were you thinking as we were moving toward those final sets?
Just that, everything that the girls talk about, the bonding and the different team building, and what Steve always talks about with them is that there's never pressure on them to win. There's pressure just to do their best, and that two doubles team that got that 4th point, they just hung in, and just we go through this, and we just hope we can do it one more time next year.
That's it. And Coach, you were recognized this past week as the Minnesota State High School tennis coach. Again, by your peers, powerful statement. Lots to be proud of. You're a humble man, and we know that. But what what counsel, what advice, just about life? I mean, here's your opportunity. Coach us a little bit. What do you really think it's all about?
The first thing is it's an honor to be recognized as such by the peers. But listen to the players, listen to and I think they've spoken loudly. It's not just about tennis; it's about some life lessons that we teach on and off the court. And I'm proud of the girls for how they've grown throughout the years. So I think that's a big key.
Well, congratulations to you. Congratulations, Coach Forrester. And girls, it is just an amazing story that I don't think anybody really recognizes. I was at that finals, and the pressure was unbelievable, and you didn't show it. Could you feel it?
Oh, for sure. For those of you who don't know, we lost to Prior Lake earlier in the season, and we lost 2-5, which in tennis isn't the closest match. And so I think that actually helped us, and it motivated us to get better. And then going into that final match, we had a lot of motivation to do well, but there was definitely some pressure.
And what was it feeling when we saw that 4th point scored? What was that first emotion you had?
It was definitely, I was more excited than any other year just because we were the underdogs this year. And it was also kind of a feeling of relief that we kept the streak going because we really didn't want to end it this year, especially being seniors. So that was really fun.
Well, congratulations, team, coach. Let's get a picture here. But again, thanks for coming in, and again, congratulations.
Next up, we have our hearings for members of the audience. We welcome community input on subjects to the school district and relevant to the school districts. Requests need to bring your seat to the board secretary prior to the start of the meeting. Each presentation is limited to 3 minutes. We ask you not duplicate information that has previously been presented. All public participation must be in accordance to policy 206. Public complaints about individual board members, employees, or students must be submitted in writing in accordance to our policy. There is no board discussion on the issues presented. Questions raised during presentations will receive responses subsequent to the board meeting as directed by the board. And if there's further information you'd like to share, you're welcome to submit that in writing. Everybody's talking tonight about policy 510, open enrollment related issues, and we are having a presentation which will actually be a few minutes after this in our first report related to policy 509 and 510. First up, I've got Alan Kohler. Alan, welcome. Following Alan will be Gary Jing.
Alan, just have to grab a mic. Okay.
When Policy 510 was first adopted in May 2008, it included 3 priority placements. Priority placement for children of staff, priority placement for siblings of staff children, and siblings in general. When this policy was implemented, there was no specific language in the state statute that said you could have such priority placements in a policy. This such language remains absent in the statute today. However, the statute also does not say that you cannot provide such priority placements. And so it is clear that when the board passed this policy, it took what you would call a loose constructionist interpretation of the law. There was ambiguity, and they decided that there was discretion to fill it. I will note that at the time, Superintendent Dressen, as the meetings reflect, stated that the district has been in contact with the Minnesota Department of Education and is acting appropriately. Therefore, priority placements that don't have specific language in the statute were included and are acting appropriately. I also point out that at the same meeting, minutes indicate that Member Johnson shared that he felt students who live in the city of Edina but are not part of the district should have priority over other open enrollment students. However, Member Robb pointed out these families do not vote in the district referendums. There's no indication that it was not allowed because of state statute. It was a policy preference. In the time since, we have come forth before the board in 2011 and requested that a policy change be included to allow priority for Edina City residents. After 8 months, this request was denied. The reason being that the Minnesota Department of Education had what we could call a strict constructionist interpretation of the law. If the law doesn't say you can do it, then you can't. We were stunned by this because that was in direct contradiction to the policy in place at Edina Public Schools, which did have some priority placements, even though there was no language allowing for that. We were further stunned by the fact that even having received the strict constructionist interpretation by the MDE, Edina Public Schools did not change their own policy. This is 2011. And in fact, it was sustained in 2012 twice when the policy was amended. In the summer of 2014, the superintendent brought forth what was called the Enrollment Projection Direction, a very awkward title thing, which asked that the board reaffirm the policies used in open enrollment, including priority placements for those even the statute did not expressly permit it. We're now to 2015, and we once again made a request that the board include a provision allowing priority for Edina City residents. And what we see before you tonight is actually a 180-degree reversal from 2008. It appears that we're now all strict constructionists and that all the previous discretion supposedly has been removed. I hope that you all take ample opportunity tonight to investigate this, to question why this reversal is taking place. It is dramatic, and it has repercussions. And in the end, if you decide that you agree with this, and you are all strict constructionists now, I hope that you will also then think about what are other ways of addressing this long-seated situation. You are all elected community members. We hope that you will then, if not this, become actively engaged in finding other alternatives to finding a solution. This cannot be delegated to anyone in staff. You need to be involved. We hope that you will be. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Next up is Gary, followed by Josima? I can't quite read it.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. I just want to reiterate again, I'm a Edina community member, but I'm outside Edina School District. And overall, I think between the city and the district, there are pretty kind of good and strong relationship, a lot of collaborations. And I also understand from the city side and also community side, there are a lot of support in many different ways to the district. So I just want to advocate again, as a Edina community member, I really like to have the privilege to be kind of given some priority in the open enrollment process. And I think that will further advance the relationship between the Edina City community and also the school district as well. And again, use my personal experience. We have started to do the open enrollment application starting grade 6, but from 6th through 9th grade, we were out of luck. We didn't get selected. That's kind of the scenario. I feel like probably this thing can be done in a slightly different way. So overall, I really appreciate the consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Joseph, I believe, is once I deciphered your handwriting. I'm sorry, I write the same way, so. That's my fault.
Hi, I'm Joseph Schwartz. I'm the parent of 2-year-old twins who we just moved into Edina. We're part of the 27% of Edina residents who are not part of the school district. I think when I talk to a lot of neighbors and friends, they have no idea it's 27%. They think it's a small little piece that, just go to Blake, just go to Breck. There's all kinds of answers that are out there, but it's where we want to be green. We want to be with the Edina people. And listening to Gary before me, it's not whether my twins actually get into elementary school, it's going to be a struggle. If we don't solve this, it's going to be a struggle all the way up through high school, whether or not we're going to be able to go to Edina. So it's a decision that my wife and I have to make now is, do we move? We've lived here for 2.5 years. And do we have to pack up and move? So these are the types of things that weigh on the decision. Thank you, and I support Alan.
Thanks, Joseph. Next up, we have Christian and Sherry. Welcome.
I guess somewhat, my name is Christian Iowin, my wife Sherry Haas. We are Edina residents that live in a pocket on Blake Road where our neighbors 100 feet, 200 feet to the south of us can go to Edina schools, and a block to the north of us can go to Edina schools, but we're forced to use the open enrollment program. I guess we're here tonight to support a change to the policy 510 to be able to just simply allow our son to be able to go to the same school as his friends that are just a couple houses down. I mean, it's not like we're talking miles and miles. The school is less than a mile from our house. We just simply would like to ask that policy 510 be amended so that there's some priority for residents of Edina, students of Edina, to be able to go to Edina schools. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for coming. Did I miss anybody who submitted? Thank you all. Next up, we're on to our consent agenda. Get a motion to bring the amended consent agenda to the floor.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to accept this evening's consent agenda. Any items on the consent agenda that have questions or items you'd like to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended, please signify. We already did that when we accepted we did the modifications, yep.
Randy, there's just a little typo on Mary's commendation. It says Snow's Nurse Administrator, I think it's SNOM. It's just a minor thing. It's S-N-O-M, not S-N-O-W. Just a typo.
Thanks, we'll take that as a friendly amendment, correction. Any additional items? Questions, comments? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with those one minor amendment and one major amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're on to our reports. First item is a revised policy 509 and 510. Rick?
I'd like to welcome Kevin Rupp to the table. Kevin's been our district legal counsel throughout our discussions with open enrollment and has worked closely with the Department of Education as well as other school districts in helping us try to sort through this policy. Kevin, we welcome you tonight. I know you've been engaged in dialogue with the Department of Education, and earlier this fall we met with Assistant Commissioner on this, and just asked that you could kind of walk us through next steps, as it were.
Thank you. So if you think about the open enrollment statute itself, it contains standards that a school district is prohibited from using with respect to applicants under the open enrollment process, and the school district's decision of whether or not to allow them to be enrolled in the district. The statute also contains standards that the district may use in that process. So we've got prohibited standards, and then we also have standards that the district may use. In 2014, the legislature stepped in to add another provision to the statute that I think is quite relevant to your decision when it comes to the statute and the board's policy. And so what the legislature did in 2014 was to say that in situations where the number of applicants exceed the capacity at a grade level, then the district is required to use a lottery in that process. The statute does say that preferences can be allowed in that lottery process. So again, we're talking about situations where we are not prohibited from using factors, and then also situations where we're not allowed to use factors. We're kind of talking about that middle ground where the statute steps in and says a lottery is required. Within that lottery, there are two permissible preferences. One is for siblings of enrolled students, and the other is so that the district can comply with an integration plan that has been approved. So along those lines, we then went back to the MDE with the district's policy and focused primarily on two questions. The first question was the current policy has a preference for district employees, for the children of district employees, and for those who reside outside of the district. So the preference would be for employees, their children, to receive a priority in the lottery process. The MDE took a look at that in the statute and said that that is not a permissible preference or priority that the district can have in its policy. The MDE said it's a preference that's not required by the statute, and they also said that it's not even allowable under the statute. The policy that you have before you, 510, then removes that preference from the existing policy. The MDE looked at the second question, which was we asked whether the policy could include a preference for children residing within the city of Edina, but outside of the district's borders. In essence, it would be a city of Edina preference, and whether we could include that preference in the language of the policy. Again, the MDE looked at it. There are really two parts to their answer on this question. First would be that such a preference would be based, at least in part, on the student's school district of residence. That is, in order to receive the preference, the student would have to reside within one of the school districts that's within the boundaries of the city of Edina's borders. The MDE said that that, in effect, would be a preference based upon school district school district residence, and said that that's not allowable. It's one of the prohibited factors under the statute. So in other words, the notion would be for the districts within the city of Edina, the notion would be this would be a preference for those school districts if their children, again, reside outside of the school district's borders. The MDE went on, though, from there to say, even if this is not a prohibited preference, being a school district of residence preference, which is prohibited under the statute, even if it's not that, it again is not a required standard that a district can have, and or even is it an allowable standard that the district can have. So the MDE, by and large, went back to this would be a lottery situation. It's not listed as an allowable preference under the lottery situation and could not be allowed. So that is the reason why that preference also is not included in the policy that you have before you. I do agree with the MDE's interpretation on that issue. And so I do not recommend that either of those preferences, whether it be the employee preference or the city of Edina preference, be included in the policy. I think if there is to be a resolution, it will have to be by some means other than what I think would be a reasonable interpretation under the statute.
Questions?
So, just for clarity, I mean, we just had a request that we have our open enrollment policy provide a preference for residents of Edina that are not within the school district, and you're saying that that's not permitted under the statute.
Yep, that's correct, and that's the MDE's opinion on the matter, and as I said, I do agree with that interpretation of the law.
And Kevin, when you referenced that there needs to be some other avenue that would be pursued, could you outline what that other avenue is? Because we've heard from the community, we appreciate hearing from them tonight. This is clearly not a new issue that's come before the board, so we've given it a great deal of consideration as to what those avenues might be. But could you provide some more background on what those options could be?
I don't think that I have anything new for the district or the board in that regard. It's either the notion of getting the approval of the adjoining school districts to a change of boundaries or some type of legislative adjustment to the boundaries.
So is this a change of interpretation?
I don't think it is, and even if we, if we do go back to 2011, and there was a reference to the MDE weighing in on this issue back in 2011. They did, and at that point, the MDE said that, again, if we're talking about that middle ground, where it's neither required nor prohibited under the statute, that they believe that since it would not be a permitted standard, the city of Edina preference would not be a permitted standard under the statute. Their opinion at that time was that it was prohibited. They, at that time, in their letter to us on that issue, referred to a random lottery kind of process. At that time, I thought, okay, where are you coming up with a random lottery process under the statute? Because it didn't provide for that process at that time. In 2014, the legislature stepped in and put the lottery process in play. So I don't think there's room to attack that opinion, so to speak, on that ground.
Additional questions for Kevin or for policy or anybody else?
Sorry. Just clarify for me when you distinguish city of residence versus, I wrote it down here, school district of residence, and why we're clarifying that.
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to grapple with, I think, as well. The statute itself says that school districts cannot have a preference based upon the parents or students' residence in another school district. So we cannot say, for example, we will give a preference to pick students, parents who reside in District A. And that was the issue also that I think MDE was grappling with in terms of, okay, would a city preference really be a school district preference as well? So if we have Hopkins, Richfield, St. Louis Park, in effect, we would be saying the preference would be to students parents who reside in those 3 school districts, plus one other factor though, they're in the city of Edina as well. The MDE looked at that and said, well, that's really a school district preference at that point. I think there's room to argue on that issue, but then they do get to their second point on that piece, which is this is not a required standard and it's not even allowable under the statute. And that's where I come back to the lottery that was put in place in 2014 as really being the controlling piece here.
So you cannot geographically, because residence versus school district, so even that is in their list of not being allowed.
The school district of residence is specifically stated in the statute as being prohibited.
Okay.
Kevin, can you review the whole process? So if someone wants to change districts, what are the steps? Do you have those?
And I don't have the full list, so to speak, in front of me, but it's a process of getting the adjoining landholders in agreement and then seeking permission from the 2 school districts. I may have missed out on a few steps in that process, but that's the general notion.
And then as far as I understand, the county has to sign off on it then as well.
That's correct. It has to then be submitted to the county for approval as well.
Any additional questions, comments, other things you considered in policy as a part of the discussion, or other changes that are in this?
No additional changes. The biggest consideration that policy has had, and we've discussed this particular policy many different times, but it's clarification of state statute. It's making sure that we can comport, which is a good word, but they comport that what we're doing is legal and recognizing that it's taken some navigation to figure out what that is, so making the necessary adjustments now that we know.
And I would just also note that the policy also impacts again, our teachers who are not residents of the school district, as far as not having preference, and that's been something that was in previous policies, and we've been in touch throughout the process with representatives from Education Minnesota, Edina, to make them aware of that and keep them informed in the process, and they actually were part of some of the dialogue that we had with the Department of Education on this matter.
All the changes that you see redlined in the policy are based on state statute, the changes that were made in 2014. And so we went through and were very careful to make sure that our policy was tracking with what state law said.
Additional questions or comments? Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Next up, we have our schedule review of policies 538, 611, and 634.
Switching documents. So I'll begin with 538. This policy has come before the board frequently. It will continue to circulate back as we take a look at field trips and how this particular policy and practice is changing as we move forward, in particular with a goal toward global competency. So part of what we've reiterated at the policy level and I believe shared at the board level is support for field trips. We recognize that this is an important part of the educational experience, and our job is to wrestle with how to make this the most effective and safe process that we can. So some of the changes that are before you in the policy this evening particularly address adding a field trip coordinator position, because we recognize that this can be a difficult policy to navigate, and so adding this position will hopefully help address that. We also addressed the need to tie back the educational experience with some of the competencies that the district is offering. A request that estimated costs be addressed up front early in the process, addressing accommodations for students with special needs, and also taking a look at the option for homestays. So we haven't landed on the solutions for all of these particular issues, but this is where a lot of the discussion has been flowing with the field trip policy. Any other field trip notes? Because we talked about a lot.
Fundraising also.
Oh,
was a big issue discussed.
Yes.
As we continue to have a more global focus to our curriculum, and we want to encourage foreign travel. Obviously, those costs are more than going to Chicago or even going to New
Right.
York. And so how do we make that affordable for all students? And so we are trying to start addressing that problem, but it's certainly by no means finished with this policy. Right.
Thank you. So, and that's the equity piece, is just making sure that there is access to these trips for all students.
I think the one other thing that we talked about is for trips in which most of the students go but not all go, whether, I think there's a responsibility for the administrator, teacher, whatever, to make sure that there's plans for the students that do not go, so that they're getting an actual learning experience in the school if maybe there's only 4 in a class that don't go. And so to make sure that equity piece on the other end happens as well.
So we
Thank
did
you.
address that in the policy?
We
I didn't
talked,
see
we
about it.
talked about it. We haven't landed. This policy will come back.
Oh, okay.
Because we've had a lot of really solid discussion. We've gone in depth. Right now, what we're continuing to identify is these are issues that need to be addressed. And we have addressed some of it, but some of it is still language that we need to develop.
We're trying to get some pieces in place now so that, for example, for May term and for next year's planning for any foreign travel, that they have the new guidelines and policies in place, with the idea that the field trip policy, as a practical matter, is always a work in progress, and it's something we work on every year. It keeps coming back. So it's not finished, but we wanted to get some things out there so that we could keep moving forward, so people could at least comply with the new procedures that we adopted.
As we get closer to that time period. Thanks.
So this will come back. It's been good discussion. 611 and 634 have fewer, well, in 611, there is
Wait,
quite a
I
bit.
have a question.
Pardon? Oh, go ahead.
I lost track of which appendix it is, but one of the appendices talks about site visits, prior site visits. And
Yes.
so I know that we don't address the appendix, that's administration, but I think that we need to take a look at that appendix, and if it calls for a prior site visit, that it is either accomplished or we figure out what are the exceptions to that rule, because it's a box to be checked. So I don't want that box to be skipped.
Good point.
And do a site visit, or have no site visit, have a potential issue, and then it kind of comes back, because I think there's a
Right.
purpose to that site visit.
There is a purpose. This has been part of, that particular item in the appendix has been addressed by policy in the past, but you have a good note, something that we can address possibly with additional job description of our field trip coordinator. So, thank you.
So do we do site visits on the Europe trips?
Yeah.
We do through the travel agencies. They're cleared through the travel agency.
Okay, policy 611. The primary changes here, well, there are quite a few changes, but this is about alignment with state statute. And Cathy, do you want to add anything other than the compliance with state statute?
Oh, it's, this is the homeschooling policy, and there were some tweaks to it to comply with state statute. A lot of the other things you'll see are language taken out of the direct policy and put into an appendix, because a lot of the policy was actually procedures that need to be met by parents who are going to homeschool their children, but it doesn't have to be part of a policy because it's procedural. Our usual practice is to put that in an appendix, and it just makes the policy cleaner, so.
And then 634, electronic technologies, acceptable use. Primary change is really taking a look at 5N, new language about unmanned airborne vehicles. So our electronics policy now addresses drones. So I think that's 21st century language.
Drones are not permitted on school grounds.
But without, I think that they would need to have prior approval. So there could be instances and educational instances, but it's the prior approval piece.
That's correct.
Sometimes we have fun in policy.
We always have fun in policy.
And so what's the path here for all of these policies, both 5.9, 5.10, and the three we just went through?
I would say we'd probably move for action on a majority of these policies. 538 might be one we continue to work with. We do want to send this back out to staff who are more directly involved and get a little more feedback. We did have a task force of staff members that did work with us on the development of the revisions, but I think we have a little bit more work to do on that. Would probably let that float a little bit, but I think the other policies we'd plan to bring back for action. I think it's important that we bring back both 510 and 509 simply because we have open enrollment headed our way, and that deadline is January 15th, so we do want any revisions to be included in that policy.
Excellent. Anything else on any of the policies?
Not until we get to action.
Calendars, 16, 17, 17, 18. Gwen and Randy?
Yes, thank you. We had a calendar committee that was comprised of parents, teachers, and administrators, and it included folks from early childhood all the way through high school. And we worked on a variety of calendars after looking at the parameters that the board had given to us. We also sent out a survey and was very pleased with the response of the survey. We had over 2,500 responders. The calendar is quite a topic among many people, and so we devised some calendars based on the parameters. We looked at the survey results. We went back to the calendars that we had developed and to see if there were some that really went against the survey results. We started over again in many cases, and then we came to the board, some committee members, and Randy came to the board and asked if, gave you several calendars, and there was a lot of discussion about some of them. We went back, we took a look at the calendars, we made some revisions, We developed other calendars. We came back and I think last week we presented 3 calendars to you. And based on that, or actually, excuse me, to the board HR committee, there were 3 calendars that we presented. With that feedback, the calendar committee went back and we then presented 2 calendars to you last week, and you have decided on the one that is before you tonight. Randy, did I miss any process?
No, just that the calendar has embedded in it 5 district workshop days at the beginning of the year, opportunity for teachers to get ready for the beginning of the school year, prepare their rooms, and also have an opportunity for professional development at the building level, at the district level, an additional district in-service day throughout the year, several additional building in-service days throughout the year, and then 4 late starts or early releases as part of the embedded professional development time throughout the calendar.
I think one other change that we had was that it was preferred that the school year began before Labor Day, and we worked on that, but we also realized in the summer of 2017 there would be 8 buildings that would be under construction, and so the board asked us to go back and take a look at developing a calendar that gave as much time off during that summer of 2017 as possible, so that we could get as much of the construction done as possible. And that was the other thing that we worked on. So I would welcome any questions or comments.
Questions?
Nope, just thanks. That's a lot of parts.
I would echo that. I want to thank first Gwen and all of the members of the calendar committee, because it is a lot of time and commitment wrestling with, as a couple of committee members have shared with the board during workshop, recognizing that often there's very little movement. There aren't a lot of options available, but we appreciate you creating as many options as you had for the board. And then also appreciation for community feedback, because it's a difficult process, and we appreciate hearing the feedback and doing what we can.
And I think it's worth just pointing out some of the differences in the calendars in the next couple of years. It's not on, it's on. Just how we are changing Thanksgiving a little bit, Thanksgiving break being, the kids will be in school 2 days that week. Listening to the community's feedback on spring break and moving that into March in both of the 2 following calendars. And then, as Gwen was discussing, you know, the whole Labor Day start and being able to gain that time over the summer, it would make the second calendar of the 2 calendars a post-Labor Day start, whereas the first calendar will be a pre-Labor Day start. So there are some nuances worth taking a look at that are differences, and things that were found within the survey. Thanksgiving being throughout the survey, seeing that that was the least important of the breaks to keep extended at the level that we have it extended now. So I just thought those were worth noting.
And consistent with that, there is not the 2-week pre-Labor Day start. The pre-Labor Day is 1 week, right?
1
Correct.
week, not
Yes.
2, which we heard a lot
did
of
hear
feedback on that.
the concern about that.
Yep, no 2 weeks before Labor Day.
I would just like to say, and I shared this last week, but I would like to share it publicly. I've worked with a lot of committees, and I thought that this committee was absolutely fabulous. We really, we weren't necessarily all on the same page, but we all heard each other, and that is really greatly appreciated. So I really thank the committee members very as well publicly.
Yep. And I want to thank, it's on. And thank you for listening to the community, and thank you to the community for taking time. 2,500 people is a lot of responses, and so we really appreciate hearing that. So.
That's
And,
Help Guide.
Thank you very much, Gwen, Randy, and the rest of the crew. Can you walk us through the timeline? Now, this comes back in December for approval. Is that our current track?
Yes, unless there are any concerns tonight, we could create more calendars, but it doesn't sound like there are any. And so at this point, this calendar that is online will be the one, that's part of the board packet, will be the one that comes back for you to vote on in December.
Any other final comments or thoughts? Thank you all.
Thank you.
Next up, we're on to item D, elementary schematic designs. Vaughn?
Good evening. I'm on. Great. So we've had a number of meetings with the elementary teams. As you recall, we are doing work in every building in the district as we move forward with this referenda, and so we thought it was important that we establish commonalities between the buildings, look at how they compare from building to building, and really approach everything that we're working on as part of the referenda initiatives as a district-wide approach to things. So over the course of the last couple of months, we've actually had 32 separate meetings with the elementary schools. We met with each one. We started them together as an entire group, so representatives from every building, meeting to look at what should be consistent between the elementary schools. Then we broke into site-based groups, met with them to look at their specific buildings and come up with an approach for how the elementary schools would operate and work. My intention is not to go through all 44 slides in this tonight, but rather to provide this for you if you want to drill down deeper into the presentation. But when we started and met with the groups, we talked about what would be consistent between the buildings. As you went from site to site, what should be the commonalities? And so we started with just basic elementary commitments. We moved on to looking at extended learning environments, or how you'd handle personalized learning in the building at all different scales, large group, small group, one-on-one, how that would act with the classroom environments, and looking at, again, what would be consistent from elementary school to elementary school. We talked a lot about the Learning Commons, which is a space directly adjacent to the Media Center, and this evolved out of a separate parallel set of meetings. As you recall, part of the referenda was to look at media centers throughout the district and to really examine the delivery system for media centers and to look at what necessary improvements would take you into the next 10 to 20 years. And so we met with a separate committee that only looked at the media centers from early childhood through 12th grade, and they developed their own set of criteria for that. We'll go over that in a second. We talked about outdoor learning environments and really came to the conclusion that each building, as a site-based building, had its own unique outdoor learning environment, and what they wanted to approach with the architecture is making sure that they had easy access from inside the buildings to those outdoor learning environments, but that the learning environments themselves would remain reflective of the culture of the separate elementaries. Talked about the media centers, as I mentioned. This group really was made up of media specialists and educators from all levels in the district, early childhood through the 12th grade. And they talked about a concept that would reinvent the media centers to say we're not getting rid of books. Instead, we're thinking about why do students go to the media center in the first place? And it's really to retrieve information and to explore ideas that they're more interested in. And so the idea of relating media centers to makerspace evolved. Media centers would become a place where you go to do your research, you incubate those ideas, and then you leave the building, whether it's at the elementary level, middle school, or high school, to go out and create those ideas in specialized spaces. And so with that as a background, we were able to not only work on this in our high school user group meetings, as we talked about at one of our previous presentations, but also approach it with the elementary schools so that each core planning team had this philosophy to build off of. We also had a parallel track on special services and special education as we looked at the buildings. That special focus group looked at how center-based programs would work inside the buildings as well as resource programs inside each of the elementaries, and developed their own diagram for how those spaces related to not only classrooms but the commons environment. And this again became a starting point for each separate core planning team to assess in relationship to their building. And we looked at safety and security, again, from a separate parallel committee, and then overlaid that onto each one of the site-based teams. So they had a lot of homework and discussion to look at and review as they move forward before we ever got into individual sites. And this is the diagram that really, as you think about the elementary schools, became our commonality between the buildings. And that each elementary school would be organized around 3 separate large common areas or large group meeting spaces. The Learning Commons, which is an extension of that media center. Student commons areas or large group gathering spaces that mostly exist in the form of cafeteria and physical education spaces, and the outdoor learning environments. And then they had personalized extended learning environments in relationship to each of the classrooms. So as you look at the buildings, this was the framework that you can start to see we organized each space around as it related to each individual site. At Concord Elementary, they really talked a lot about their 5-section building. It's the largest section building in the district, and how those would be organized, and they wanted to be organized by grade. We looked at that in relationship to their center-based education program, special education, excuse me, and the multi-purpose room. This is their diagram as it relates to our previous commonality. And so you'll see the similar approach for each of the elementary schools as we move through tonight, so you can see how each relates to each other, but how they work within the individual buildings. So our large blue circles represent those large student-based common spaces. Our purple areas represent the learning commons and extended learning environments. The green would be the classrooms, and the orange would be administrative or staff areas as we move through.
So Don, just quickly, is that what that bubble map there, is that what you're desiring, or is that where they're currently at?
This is what is proposed in terms of what they would like to see with a reorganization for the building. And so as we take a look at the existing buildings, with this being existing, using those same codes, and this being the proposed. So what we were able to do is, through an addition on the building with classrooms, which was similar to what was in the referenda diagram, but in a slightly different location, we're able to create an extended learning environment around each of those 5-section classrooms. The media center or learning commons area takes place at sort of the elbow for the building, so directly located in the middle of all the classroom areas. What's currently special education on the lower level becomes a separate 5-section team cluster space. Special education moves on the lower level adjacent to the center of the building as well, and then this would be our addition on 2 separate floors here. So when you come in the main door, we'll have a revised office space with a secure entry point, and then each of those extended learning environments around the classroom organization.
So Vaughn, I remember when we talked about this before, and the previous schematics didn't have grades in there. And my hesitation is that if we're looking at, that putting the grades in there makes me feel that this is rigid, not flexible. And so I'm just wondering, and I know the core planning teams put a lot of effort and a lot of thought into this, but I still worry that we are constraining ourselves.
That's a good point to bring up. One of the reasons that we labeled them with grades is because as we met with each of the teams, they had difficulty providing context without knowing, well, how are we going to look at it next year and looking at it in comparison to what's there. But one of the things that we challenged as the design members was looking at, okay, 5 years from now, what if that isn't the approach? How are the classes organized? What if you decide to go more to a proficiency-based approach? Or what if we want to create a STEM-based suite in here, for example? And looking at, are we distributing those personalized learning spaces within the building enough? Is there an ability to reorganize the classrooms enough as we look through? And so from a design standpoint, we actually stripped the labels off and looked at them as the core pieces to give you the flexibility for the future. So while the labels might exist today, it's really to help understand if we were moving next year, how would we want the building organized? That's the desire from the planning team, but they have the flexibility to organize however you might look at it for the future.
And Vaughn, so when you took a look at this, was there any study done of the potential utilization of the flexible space? So for example, if you get one flexible space for a 4-classroom cluster, does that mean all 4 classes can use it at the same time, 2 can use it? I mean, do we have enough flexible space for what we anticipate the usage to be?
We actually, from a starting point standpoint, as we talked about with each group, they really looked at it as we currently have students sitting in the hallway for a lot of these types of activities, or we're taking them to a different part of the building. And so as they looked at what would take place in those extended learning environments, it wasn't so much that they were looking for a place to gather 60 students at once. It's a space for more small group work to take place, an extension of the classroom. So around each one of these extended learning environments, for example, there'll be a lot of glass and openness to that area so you can visually observe what's happening there. For students that need more one-on-one help with special education resources, it would take place in those areas. And it might be more of an active project-based space. If they're going to have the 60-person type assembly or more, they're likely going to be using the learning commons space outside of the media centers for that type of activity to take place. So it's really a variety of size of spaces.
But even if it's going to be used for a small group, we still need to know whether it meets the needs of the number of small groups that might want to utilize that space. And so have we done any type of assessment that says, here's what we anticipate the need is going to be so that we don't have the hallway classrooms anymore?
We haven't actually built that level of usage into the design elements. That's currently something that we're studying with each of the principals in the buildings in terms of potential programming for those spaces and how they would be utilized.
And what type of furniture, if there's furniture, would there be in these spaces?
Mobility is the key to that, the ability to rearrange those spaces. It's likely furniture that's different than the type you'd find in the classroom, although that furniture will be mobile as well, but it's probably more soft seating, more conducive to small group interaction. There'll likely be conference room space in these areas, so it'll be a variety of different types of furniture, but consciously different than what you experience in the classroom environment. That's another big part of the referenda, obviously, is replacing classroom furniture with the ability to rearrange and transform the rooms into different types of settings to allow for other activities and learning styles beyond the lecture-based only model.
And Vaughn, just with either the Concord example or one of the other elementaries, can you identify what the security changes will be to make the
Absolutely.
sites safer?
Number one security piece is the main entry sequence and how we move into the building. And so at each of the buildings, we're moving to a secure vestibule model where visitors to the building after the start of school would come in. The interior vestibule doors would be locked, and all visitors would have to pass through the reception area before gaining access in the building. From that point, they're registered, sign in, and then move through that space out into the rest of the building. Exterior doors are going to be locked and card access only, so that students leaving the building would have to be accompanied by a staff member to come back in. And we're looking at bus and parent traffic on site as part of our driving sequence coming onto each of the sites as well. And as we look at the site, you can see where the addition would take place on Concord and how bus drop-off would work. Currently, we've explored different models of bus drop-off and parent drop-off above and below for Concord, and are looking at a revised model that would have bus drop-off on the upper level with parent drop-off in the lower level. Excuse me, vice versa. A bus drop-off in the lower level with parent drop-off up above. Our labels are backwards.
But that's still under investigation?
Yes, we're still looking at that and working with David White and Eric Hamilton in the district as we explore that, and each of the separate principals. At Cornelia, we talked a lot about how they would be organized. In this one, it's a 4-section building, and wanted to have their pairs of grades, or their grades set up in 4 classrooms adjacent to each other. They wanted to have extended learning environments that were a little larger, so their extended learning environments revolved around pairs of grades, so that they could have some cross-pollination as between age levels. We looked at a centralized space for the building, so when you come in the front door, making all of our community-based activities centrally located. That was actually another meeting that we had with Community Ed, Kids' Choice Programming in the district, and how the buildings would be used before and after school, and taking a look at the community use for that. We looked at gifted and talented with some different location and space, and looked at relocating that center-based DCD population closer to the office area to make use of adjacent nursing. This is how their diagram worked. If you remember, Cornelia and Highlands have a similar floor plan, and their gymnasium space is the smallest of the district, so part of it was increasing their gymnasium space or their physical education space. Part of it was providing more specialist space for this site, and so a big part of this revolved around a gymnasium addition onto the building. We'll actually be converting the existing gym to their media center and learning commons adjacent to the main entry as you come in, with a new gym towards the back of the building or off of that main central corridor. And this is how it translates into the floor plan. So classroom additions on the south end of the building, small specialist addition to the north end of the building, and the gym addition off of the west side. Coming in, office reconfiguration again to create that secure vestibule. Our media center and learning commons directly adjacent to the main entry. Extended learning environments here and here on either side of the courtyard. Our grade levels moving along the corridors here. First grade and kindergarten in this portion of the building, with our center-based program being relocated towards the center of the building as opposed to its current location down this wing.
So for Cornelia, the extended learning spaces are not clustered near the classrooms. They're sort of more centrally located.
They're centrally located along the space so that they have equal access to that area. That also provided us a larger space for those extended learning environments, and it made use of the courtyard so that we could get some visibility across the building and daylight into those areas. We have a small one in this area as well. The media center is a very large shift. The current media center is in this location. This now moves it adjacent to the main entry and really provides that learning commons at the hub of the building.
The special edition, is it contemplated for?
They have a lot of intervention specialists in the building that need additional space. Currently, they're sharing closet space. They're sharing just about every nook and cranny they can find, and so this would provide dedicated space for those intervention specialists.
So it's not specific to the special ed?
No, it's actually flexible in terms of different types of student-based help that could occur in that area.
Just seems like it's off on the far end of the building compared to where the students are.
Part of that was looking at where they wanted to have more of their commonality based in the building and how it would make use of that central spine, and looking at pulling the students closer to that area as opposed to a group of intervention specialists.
Thanks.
So does that building feel at all that the extended learning spaces are overly concentrated in one part of the building? Say if the grade configuration changed in the future?
If you take a look at actually the majority of our students would be in this portion of the building, so it's heavily weighted to where we feel the most of the students are in the building as well. With kindergarten areas, most of their activities take place within the classrooms themselves, and so you'll find with each of the plans, most of the groups said we want to focus those extended learning environments around our 1st through 5th grade students. Part of the limitation also with this, obviously, is the existing architecture and the existing buildings. We have very different buildings in the district. Cornell and Highlands are the only ones that have a similar floor plan. And so we're looking at, from the infrastructure of the building, where can we make these moves, what makes the most use of the space, and how can we work with the classrooms in somewhat of a similar configuration than they're in now. And then this is a site plan showing where the addition for the building would be. We do have some play equipment that will need to be slightly relocated as we take a look at this area. Other additions are smaller on the building itself.
Is there still an addition though in the upper?
In this corner, yep. Countryside, a little bit different. It also has a 2-story classroom portion to the building like Concord, but at Countryside, most of our large group spaces are on one side of the entry and our classrooms are on the opposite side. They spent a lot of time looking at the architecture of their building and talking about the spaces, and came up with a slightly different approach on how they would handle extended learning environments, similar to maybe a housing development with park land or green space. And they said, rather than have 4 separate ones, can we pool them together in a centralized location for the building, so we have not only small group area but large group gathering space. And so that became a framework that we looked at for the building. And we spent a lot of time talking about the entry sequence there, with it being sort of a pinch point for the building. How we handled security and moving students back and forth between the 2 different sides was going to be important. So their diagram, you can really see our learning commons and our extended learning environments on the upper and lower level. They're making use of that learning commons outside the media center heavily for the upper level. Our large group gathering spaces are our current spaces in the center of the northern part of the building. And this is how it translates. So at the bottom of the ramp on the one side, our extended learning environment for our 4 groups of 3-section classrooms in the center of that space. Our learning commons on the upper level with our 3 5th grade classrooms. Their continuous progress classrooms, they felt it was very important to, no pun intended, continue the design that they have currently with the access between the rooms, and wanted those lined up 5 in a row. This represents a small addition on this portion of the building. Moving the office from its current location adjacent to the entry to create that secure vestibule coming in. Art now becomes centrally located as a student component function, and our music spaces, currently it's art and music in this location. This relocates music into an adjacent music suite in that area. and our kindergarten remains in the location it's currently in.
So Vaughn, you mentioned something, I have two thoughts, but, so you said that there was access between the CP classrooms so that there was access in between the classrooms within the classroom. Are we looking at that with the other classrooms?
That actually is part of the architecture for the building currently, and so with that in place and not wanting to modify the classrooms, lining the 5 CP rooms up allowed them to look at a structure that moved from age levels easily between the buildings. So it's a feature that already exists in all the classroom spaces.
I meant for like the non-CP classes.
It already exists in
Oh,
those
okay.
rooms as well.
And is that consistent across all the schools?
No, it's not. That's unique to this building.
So that's my
It's possible.
concern, because, like I said, it still feels very rigid to me, particularly for the CP. Maybe CP in 5 or 10 years doesn't exist, and now we have 5 classrooms, and maybe, so that's my concern.
Mhm. Correct. No.
No, neither is Concord.
I see the potential expansion at the end. Is there a reason that's there?
We always like to take a look at your buildings and determine if they did have to expand in the future, what might be a likely place that could occur, and explore that as part of the possibility. And so it's a part of the diagram that shows up on there, just to simply indicate if you're in the future, if you were to take a look at how you might expand, it's been thought through in terms of how we'd structure the building and look at that approach.
But the addition as it exists is basically 2 classrooms, 2 stories.
Correct.
Thanks.
And this is where that addition would fit on the site plan as you take a look at the building. For Creek Valley is probably the most interesting architectural layout with the hexagonal classrooms. We took a look again at how that building would be arranged, and based on not only current configuration but also likely age scenarios, the 4-section classroom cluster made sense for that building. They wanted to maintain that. We wanted to make sure that music and art became centrally located in the midst of all the student needs. Spent a lot of time talking about our center-based program in this site as well, and what the right location would be for that, and how we would handle additional specialist spaces. So in this diagram, you can see our large group gathering spaces are currently anchored by our cafeteria and our gymnasium. Our media center remains in the center of the building, but this one moved towards, similar to Cornelia, a large learning commons directly inside the main entry to the building. Looked at relocating art and music to a central location and working around that hexagonal arrangement of the classrooms to create separate extended learning environments. And this is how that translates into the plan. So you can see here again, we're labeling them by grade, but it could be any configuration. 4 classrooms around an extended learning environment. This moves the entry wall. The actual hexagons are not pure hexagons in the current layout. There's a small entry vestibule that's really not used for a lot of space. So we're recapturing that around each one of the areas by moving that entry point back slightly into the room and maintaining our 900 square foot classrooms. They all have that extended learning environment viewing into that space now from those 4-section clusters. The exception is 5th grade, which is organized around pairs around either side of the learning common space coming into the building. Our center-based program moves from its current location into the addition on the building. Part of the referenda was to add specialist spaces at this building where they were undersized compared to the other elementaries. So instead of building an interventionist addition on the building, we're looking at special education addition for that center-based program. Puts it closer to an entry drive and sequence coming into the building, and locates our interventionist more centrally located to the student population. And this is where that addition would be on the site.
Do you think if classroom configuration change, that seems like one of the buildings that these changes would flow so easily because of its unique design?
I think once you start breaking the buildings down, and this is what we found with each one of them, is that you're really looking at how are classrooms arranged. Are they arranged in pairs? Are they arranged in 3? Are they arranged in 4? Are they arranged in 5? And 5 would be our maximum at Concord, which provided us with a few more of those extended learning environments. But each building has that type of module attached to it. And so as you look at how the grade structure moves through the building, it gives you that flexibility. Hopefully too, with this one from our Learning Commons, if we're to open this portion of the building up, you experience a little bit of trying to find your way or difficulty finding your way in this building based on the corridor system. This actually, from this location, will give you a view down either one of the corridors into the space and will help clean up some of that circulation ambiguity. At Highlands, again, this is another one of the continual progress buildings paired with Discovery classrooms. So we looked at how those are organized. The continual progress classrooms were to be organized in 4 pairs. So again, looking at that 2-pair module with CP as 4 classrooms organized together. We looked at how what the pairings would be, for example, first and second grade adjacent to each other, or as we broke it down further, that's really for us, that meant 4 modules a classroom. So looking at the numbers as opposed to what the grade labels would be. Which spaces would be organized around the Learning Commons, which ones would be organized around extended learning environments, and looking at those common spaces towards the center of the spine, similar to Cornelia. So this is how their diagram looked. One option that we did question back and forth between the groups as we were meeting with them was we were sharing information about what each individual site looked like. And so we had a lot of conversation with Cornelia about Highlands and Highlands about Cornelia. And rather than make the buildings identical in terms of their approach, we chose for a site-based option and layout. The buildings actually themselves, despite having similar floor plans, are already not identical, and so that seemed to validate that approach. Their media center would remain in the center of the building with the Learning Commons off of that main joint, extended learning environments dispersed out into the wings, reorganized office space again, gym and cafeteria in their current locations. And this is what this looked like. Rather than make one large gym, they really approached this around the idea of an activity-based multi-purpose room and a project-based multi-purpose room for art, as we took a look at what that would be. So creative art space here, our activity room, our media center, our cafeteria, all gathered around that centralized Learning Commons. Our Discovery classrooms on one side of the building with a large portion of the corner opened up for extended learning environment in this area. Our CP classrooms currently on this side of the diagram, and relocated special education programs adjacent to the main entry with our office renovations and our secure vestibule in this location as well.
Can you explain? Oh, sorry.
This does also provide a classroom addition on the side of this corridor similar to what exists currently at Cornelia.
Can you explain the difference in the extended learning spaces that are clustered around the media center and then the Discovery classrooms versus the 2 that show more, I don't know, diagram within the extended learning spaces by
Really,
CP rooms?
we're just starting the user groups with these groups right now, and so the fact that we had separate rooms on there was only drawn in to explain to any of the groups how one of these extended learning environments might look. So we were saying, well, maybe there's some small group conference area, maybe this is large group. This really could be a diagram that would apply to each one of those, and that's the process that we're working on right now, is further delineation of those extended learning environments.
So on this one, my concern when I look at this is the learning spaces between the CP classrooms. I could see that ends up being that learning space, that Learning Commons is for this group, this one's for this one, and then all the Discovery ones have to use that one. And I can just see how that could easily be owned that way, because you have to go way across the school to get, if you wanted to use a different one. So this one balance seems a little off to me.
In the original design, we actually had classrooms in this location, and we had our creative multipurpose room, or our art room, in this location. And one of the steps that we took with Highlands is having a staff-wide meeting where they looked at the building, and we got a lot of feedback from the staff in terms of what they saw and what they thought may work better for the building. But because of the process, we didn't have that just be a staff decision. We had our core planning team meet again and re-examine the criteria and take a look at it. And in the end, they decided that based on this being a specialist space with art, they'd rather have that in the center of the building as opposed to one wing. They felt that the students in this area of the building, maybe being the oldest students, would have an easier time traveling to that area, and they really wanted to make the most use of that Learning Commons space as part of the extended learning environments for those areas. Based on their strong desire to have those pairs of classrooms together, this was the plan they felt worked best for that building. And again, from a module standpoint, we were really looking at it as around the idea of we have two pairs of spaces.
So I'm not clear on what we've got this classroom above the cafeteria there on the diagram, split in two, and then we have an activity-based multi-purpose room right next to it.
This is more phy-ed-based activities. It's more like an aerobic studio, fitness studio. This is really more of a maker space for art and other types of functions.
Okay. And the gym space, is that going to be a gym? Is it going to be high ceilings, or is it going to be more like this room?
It's probably about a story and a half as opposed to a full two-story gym. It's not really intended to be a basketball gym as much as it is a type of gym to do different types of physical activity, more along the lines of really about the only reason you would have that high base space would be for volleyball and basketball. And with the spaces that are available in the district, that was another question that we had with the activities director in terms of how do we distribute spaces, and having some more aerobic space was seen as a positive in terms of a variety space within the district.
Okay.
I guess I share a little concern that's similar to Lisa's, just that this, I hate to see us base a building purely on the current program that's there. So, because it does seem like the extended learning spaces that go with the libraries may be, or media centers. I don't know. I have a little concern with this one, that it's very heavy program based, and that we're not considering that someday programs may change in these buildings.
Part of the process in working through the user groups with the spaces, we tend to keep design somewhat fluid as we move through. We don't sign off and just say, okay, this is done, we're moving on to the next phase. So as new information comes out, we're looking at those types of issues as well. We're trying to find that balance between the buildings. I'm not positive that the extended learning environments will end up between these pairs of classrooms as opposed to shifting towards one end or the other. Okay. But one of the difficulties does come in the fact that some of your buildings, actually almost every elementary with the exception of Concord and Normandale, have a very strong divide, and you have classrooms on one side or the other. And so when it comes to trying to find that balance, it's sometimes difficult to get the spaces balanced out and to have equal space from one side to the other. So we'll continue to explore that.
If I could follow up on that, and this may be a question as much for Randy as it is for you, Vaughn. When I looked at the schematics for the high school, I understood what we're trying to accomplish, how the architecture fit in with that, and how it would be used, and it all made sense. Mm-hmm. I look at these various schematics, and it's not obvious to me, and I may be missing something other people see, but a lot of the questions are, how's it going to be used? Have we preserved enough flexibility? And those are all questions to me that indicate we don't really know what we're going to be doing with the space, and it worries me to move forward with remodeling before we know that. So maybe between the two of you, you explain how that was addressed by the committees and how it's addressed in the schematics.
Do you want to start, or would you like me to start?
Go ahead, and then I'll follow up.
I'd probably start by taking it back to the original task force that met ahead of the referenda and looked at the different spaces and talked about what the needs were, what they wanted to see for their students. With many of the new elementary schools that are designed, those extended learning environments are designed in around those classroom spaces, and they're put in place specifically for those types of activities that are currently happening in the hallways or happening in spaces that aren't adjacent to those rooms. So they really are breakout environments around those classroom areas to be used for those small group or personalized type of activities. At the elementary level, you still have a lot of work happening in the classrooms themselves and happening in the group instruction. This is really meant as an extension of that environment outside the classroom. And so it was a reflection of an outcome of that referenda committee or the long-range planning committee that happened ahead of the referenda, and looking at what's happening in other types of new construction.
I would just add that for about 4 years, maybe longer, this was prior to me coming here, personalized learning was established as an essential component, one of the big 3 elements of our strategic plan. And personalized learning involves students learning how to manage various pathways for their own learning and incorporates different modalities for learning, which might include large groups, medium groups, small groups, clusters of students working with adults, students working individually on computers, etc. So a central element to design for a personalized learning environment is really flexibility. And as Vaughn mentioned, at an elementary level, much of that does happen in a smaller space oftentimes, or in a classroom space. But also built into this design are flexible areas to go into larger group spaces as well. Programs are going to evolve over the next 15 years, and we're building spaces through 2030. And as those programs evolve, the central element that remains critical is that we have as much flexibility in the design of the structure and the building as possible, knowing that the personalized learning framework is going to be something that we're going to continue to grow and expand upon. The program itself is simply how we organize the different learning activities and what themes or key characteristics we use to kind of glue the learning experience together. And again, as those programs continue to evolve and grow and reshape, we want the design of the building to be as flexible as possible.
So my concerns about the drawings are that we started the referendum with the idea that programming would drive facilities. I think that we're at this moment probably a little bit ahead of that, where facilities are getting put together. And I think what you said was we're addressing what's currently happening in the hallways. And so it seems to me that we're looking in part at addressing where we are today, and we're not necessarily looking to where we're going to be. And so that we don't have the programming in place yet. I'm a little concerned that we don't know how utilization will work for these spaces, and I wonder whether we shouldn't get answers to those questions before we start to approve these schematics.
So this project has to last us through 2030. And that's what we have to have designed flexible enough and responsive enough. The key, again, is at an elementary level is much different than a secondary level. This is where breakout fast is going to happen, and what's important about this is just paired classroom events. You know, we can create flexibility within the paired classrooms to allow that responsiveness. What we have basically are maker spaces, you know, large group spaces that are going to continue to evolve going forward, whether we have specialists in them or what other type of production areas evolve going forward. We don't know exactly how curriculum is going to be integrated going forward. So what we need is that paired classroom space, because it's still going to be core to have that classroom teacher at the elementary level with a group of assigned students. And then they're going to flex and break from that with additional staff members. So being able to have furniture that is flexible is really important. And then having this breakout space, those are going to be supervised areas. I mean, what's different from high school setting is many of those breakout spaces, as we look at them, are going to have interventions or acceleration or some type of support experience space. So that is, you know, again, always going to be part of an elementary program. It's going to be less about independence and more about interactions with adults, be it volunteers or be it classroom teachers. So I think the key, again, is going to be some flexibility within the classroom, which blends this, and given what we are able to do with the structure that we have and the funds we have available, this does create that flexibility for programming today. And yep, we are locked in because people still need to figure out how it fits today. And so we have classrooms assigned to it, and we have space assigned. But as we go to the future and as we redesign program, we will have that flexible space, and those classrooms won't necessarily be played out that way as we look to the future.
So we're currently looking at the elementary level at different programs that we might put in place, IB or a type of IB, highly effective teacher, and I can't remember all the acronyms, but so we haven't decided which of those paths we're going to. Will all of those paths be accommodated by these drawings?
Yes, but I'll let Susan speak to that.
I think we did, excuse me, we did talk a lot in the elementary but didn't know which Susan, but I was going to speak first. We did talk in the elementary meetings about that, and that we don't want to be limited by what we're currently offering. And I think when we talk about whether it's STEM or STEAM or IB or whatever we decide to go with, and I know those discussions are ongoing, is that the flexibility of those kind of spaces, that we might have it labeled right now as a Creative Commons or an art room, but maybe that looks a little bit different if the program changes. We have some other resource spaces that could become more science labs or maker spaces. And so I think, as Lisa pointed out early, that those labels are based on what we're currently programming, but the discussions have really evolved around what could they be if we don't label them that way. And I think we're kind of it's a catch-22. If you don't label them, people can't figure out what it is that we're looking at. And if we do label them, then people get restricted. But the discussion, having sat through all of those 32 apparently, meetings, that they really were robust and not just looking at what we're currently doing. And I think the flexibility is built in there even to the point of, we don't know, those what look like walls between those classrooms might be glass, they might be movable. Those are decisions that have not been made yet, but yet we feel like, as Rick has pointed out, the buildings were built in a different time. We talked about that a lot last spring, and we're trying to adapt them as best we can, given the physical structure that we're limited to when you have buildings that were built in the 60s.
Maybe another way to think about this, and we approached it this way with each of the groups, is what would we do if we were doing a new building versus an existing building? And we're oftentimes limited to how people see existing buildings, and that your contextual reference is so strong with that building. But we said, okay, here's the conversations we would have if we were doing a new building. We'd start with, what are the community-based spaces and what are the largest group spaces? Are those hubs or are those destination areas? And how would you organize the rest of the spaces around that? From there, it really breaks down into how many classroom environments do you have in the building? What's the arrangement of those, and how do those extended learning environments for those spaces plug into adjacent areas? We know that in order to really be flexible, it shouldn't be designed around one pedagogy. It really should be, the architecture doesn't limit what you want to do in the building. Currently, if you look at the buildings, there's no space other than classrooms. They're very compact, they're very dense in terms of the classrooms, and really what these projects are doing is they're starting to open up some of those spaces. They're providing a little bit of relief around groupings of classrooms so that you can have different types of activities happening that maybe can't take place as easily within the classroom, would be disruptive if you started to divide the classroom into these students are going to do some of this, these students are going to be some of that, and it's starting to create different types or styles of spaces for you to do that. It doesn't eliminate the classrooms, but it starts to organize how the classrooms work and provide some of that flexibility and breathing space within each of the buildings to accommodate not only what you might be doing today and tomorrow, but how you might look at the buildings 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
Change the subject a little bit if I can. We're trying to build far into the future, and it's obviously hard to predict. But one thing that I think we've all seen in public education is spaces end up getting pressed into uses that weren't anticipated. We don't know what the city's plans are for development or higher density housing. We don't know what our student populations will be. Are we giving any thought to what would best preserve our ability to provide excellence in education and stay with our programmatic commitments if we have to deal with greater growth in student population than we anticipate? And is there any way to deal with that? Maybe as a fair part of the question too.
Part of the reason that, to the earlier question of why would we show a potential expansion on there, was to look at how you might expand each of the buildings and studying those concepts in terms of what it might be. I think to recapture those extended learning environments and turn them back into classrooms, while a possibility, would put you back into a position that you're looking at today in terms of the density of the building. And so I think that's really probably the best way to look at it, is as needs change in the future. If you do have more students in that building, how would you accommodate that?
And is that something, other than looking at where you could expand, is there any other thought about that?
Well, part of it is, again, remember, we have open enrollment is about 15% of our population, so that's been our flux. So if we have more residential growth, we would have to limit our open enrollment, and that's another way to control it. We don't know how education is going to continue to evolve. We don't know the impact of early childhood, for example, and are we positioned well for early childhood? I mean, there may need to be, more study going forward as we look into the 2020s, exactly how early education is going to impact us. And then what impact does that have on a kindergarten program and a K-5? And we're just in some transition, but I think we do have a good handle on enrollment because of the way we can manage our open enrollment numbers. And that would probably be the best solution. But we are having additions. We've identified areas that we can flex, and that would probably be our two solutions.
We've looked at 5. The Normandale is maybe like Creek Valley. It's the most interesting, and that was never designed as an elementary school to start. It's a former high school that was converted to an elementary school, and so as we look at the floor plan, it has some of those issues to address. It's also the only one that's entirely sandwiched between 2 other floors of a building, so it has some unique characteristics as well. This building really looked at, again, starting with grade configuration and classroom configuration as an organizing element, and looking at how the current media center, which is really, although essentially located, it's a destination, then it's locked on both sides, how that could unlock the keys to the building, and with the relocation of district offices off of the 2nd floor, how it could improve circulation, improve unity in the building, and improve security overall. So their organization really has their main entry, their theater component, to one side of the building, their cafeteria and media center to the other side. Their gyms, as you recall, are on a separate level for the building. Looking at extended learning environments around those classroom areas and creating a small student commons directly inside the front door. So using some of that satellite space from where the classrooms are for student use. So in terms of the building layout itself, media center centrally located, but opening that up to create learning common spaces to both sides of the corridor. They took another interesting approach in saying our office is so far away from where the students are. Can we take a look at our student service-based functions like nurse's office, for example, and social workers, psychologists as being more centrally located to the students? So like the high school, splitting those office functions as a response to the limitations of the architecture itself, expanding classrooms into the area currently occupied by the district office, and expanding their cafeteria space as well to get more of an appropriate size. Our circulation now can move through the building, and we can secure the building at the stairwells as opposed to the configuration that exists. And then reorganizing our front entry sequence to provide more of that secure lockdown point. So kindergarten area directly adjacent to art and music, and then the classrooms circulating through the wings. No addition onto this building.
Are the current elevators adequate? And do we have any issues regarding safety of having people access it using the elevators?
With the elevators, because they need to get to the 1st floor and 3rd floor, we'll have to rely on digital controls within the elevator to not open up on the 2nd floor without having the correct password, or key code rather. But the quantity of elevators and the functionality is appropriate for the building.
Thanks.
So the flexible learning space that's near the reception, I mean, is that really a functional space given that the classrooms are so far away?
This is actually maybe more in response to your question of what if we want to do something that's maybe a little bit larger group or large variety. They said we could bring groups of students down here in an area that would be, give them the ability to be a little bit louder. Would actually, they would like to create their access point to their outdoor learning environment off of this common space coming in so that they have the theater, that entry point, and their outdoor learning area accessed off of that area. I believe that is it for the elementaries. Additional questions?
One last question. On the Normandale, the new Normandale classrooms that that you're looking at, that we're adding in the what is now the district office, are those classrooms rather long and narrow, or is that just the current diagram and it won't
which
be
classrooms
reflective
are you
of that?
referring
The
to?
new ones that will be added.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's actually that's the original classroom layout from when it was a high school, if you go back to the structural layout. And so they're the same square footage. They're a little bit more rectangular, but it works off of the original classroom bay proportions. So we're taking advantage of that structure.
So when we look at all these classrooms that are existing, do you envision that a teacher can set up different stations within those classrooms, or are they not going to be big enough? So for example, you might have, if 25 kids, you might have 20 in one area and 5 in another because you're doing some sort of grouping. Is that an option within the current layout?
It will definitely be an option, and I think that's the one thing that doesn't show up on any of the floor plans is remembering that we are outfitting the classrooms with new furniture at each of the classrooms. And so while the extended learning environments might be more of an architectural response to the personalized learning approach, every classroom will have new furniture in it, allowing you to do many different things than attached chair and sled-based desk style piece of furniture. We've looked at the square feet for the classrooms. We feel that they are appropriate in size. Again, though, we are, let's say that we felt they were 20 square feet too small. We don't have the budget to start moving walls 3 feet or 4 feet here and having a chain reaction down the line. And so where we saw classrooms in buildings that were currently being utilized as smaller spaces where you've adjusted to the need over time, we're trying to correct those areas and get back to an equitable sized classroom across each of the elementary schools if one doesn't exist.
Does the cafeteria remain its current configuration?
No, the current configuration ends right about here, and so it's increasing in size by about 50%.
Okay, thanks.
So when we were in Omaha for our boondoggle or whatever, and so some of the spaces we saw there that were interesting was essentially no wall between two classrooms and two teachers merging, and then there was sort of a traditional setup on one side, and then the other side of the classroom was really small group and different things, and they would merge back and forth sort of fluidly about that. Is that sort of vision able to be done here?
It could be done. We didn't get a lot of that, actually, in terms of questioning about how the classrooms would work and how they'd be utilized. Most of the dialogue where that took place was around buildings where currently the teachers are working in pairs, are comfortable working in pairs. It's something we could provide, but to do it everywhere district-wide and the possibility that somebody might do that is a pretty major budget impact. And so it wasn't a move that we necessarily jumped to. However, I will say at Concord, in each one of the 5 sections, 2 classrooms have that ability. So we have the classrooms that have the pair. At Creek Valley, 2 classrooms in each 4 section have that. As we looked at each of the buildings, we tested it and thought about how that would work. The limitation came down to teachers saying, well, in order for that to work, we would have to work together as a group of teachers and decide who needed the large room during that day, who needed the smaller room. And so they started to take the labels off in terms of saying, this is my room, and looking at it as this is a group of 5 classrooms that the teachers for this grade level would organize and discuss collaboratively which teachers would need that space for the day and what they might be doing in that area, which is more of a middle school or a high school approach when you think about it. So we did talk about those types of things, but we didn't do it between every space on the possibility that somebody might want to do that. We looked at more of a limited approach.
Vaughn, will the restrooms in Normandale be redone? Some
Yes.
of the
Yes.
more traditional 50s style?
We're going to get them up to 1962 standards. No, there's on top of the referenda and the programmatic components, you're also, you have a long-range plan for both your 2-year and 10-year that addresses infrastructure needs. We know that this building has some significant infrastructure needs around plumbing and piping, so as we do some of this work, we're building in how it overlaps with the construction or how we're prepping for it for future projects as well. And we're looking at that with each of the buildings. You're not doing projects simultaneously at each of the buildings in terms of those major deferred maintenance items, so we have to plan for those in the future to make sure that any work you do now as part of the referenda isn't disrupted at some point.
So the Normandale schematic has a couple of these operable walls. So
Correct.
I take it then each of the elementary schools has a couple of those operable wall classroom setups?
At some point, it's not in every single cluster as we go through,
Right.
but in many of them, yes.
So every school will have some classrooms that will
Correct.
have the ability to join together.
Correct.
So we could call that an incremental change.
Yes.
But what non-weight-bearing classrooms, like the ones we saw in Omaha, those changes can be made. You know, if we're looking at different types of pairing and sizing, those can be made relatively easy down the road at a
Yes.
future point
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
be responsive to the curriculum.
There are no, for the most part, the structure runs from inside quarter walls to exterior walls, and so making those changes at any point in the future is pretty easy to do. It's just, it's a project that requires some amount of construction over that summer period.
So again, I keep picking on Randy, but to the extent that we're also doing a lot of this remodeling to try to drive change and improvement in the educational program, by failing to build some of those things in now, are we making it harder to get where we want to be?
So I go back to, again, what's in our strategic plan around personalized learning and how that can be created in an existing classroom right now, but how the addition of other key types of spaces really fosters growing that personalized learning environment across the school. And some of those key spaces that we don't have right now are larger group spaces. And what's really critical in this design are these maker spaces. We have in our educational competencies the desire to grow inquiry, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration skills amongst all of our students. And those learning common spaces with maker spaces as part of that element really offer that opportunity in that school design. So in an elementary level, again, we have many existing classrooms where personalized learning can take place, but one element that we are missing are some of these other types of spaces across the schools. So that being the central framework of what we want to do moving forward, how we package standards as part of the learning experience, that's going to continue to evolve. It could be that we are, looking at STEM schools down the road, and those maker spaces would be critical as part of that design. Or it could be that we're looking at IB or looking at some other type of curricular framework. So we believe from the standpoint of what we've seen in the design, that will allow us the flexibility for how the program's going to change and evolve. Because we're building sites that have to address current program needs, but program needs 5 years from now, and program needs 10 years from now. So that's going to have to remain flexible in itself so that we respond to the needs and desires of the community. So from a teaching learning standpoint, it's hard to predict exactly what is going to be where and what is needed where. So we're looking at just the general design element of flexibility around different size spaces, different types of spaces, knowing that personalized learning is going to lead us to the direction we're headed around excellence and equity for all students.
So not to keep harping on this, but we've talked at times about how our physical plant limits what we can do. So you're comfortable that this new physical plant isn't going to limit the options that we want to pursue?
I'm saying I'm comfortable that people are having the dialogue about that. Now, whether or not these are the final plans will remain to be seen, but as Susan mentioned, people are having that dialogue. What do we want this programming to look like? What can we do in the future? That's part of the process.
So aren't we better served to wait till that dialogue is finished?
I think that dialogue is happening parallel to the plans that we are building, so that the design elements are being incorporated in these plans that you're seeing.
I just have to you'll say for me, voting yes to approve the plans before you feel comfortable answering that question, that, we're now at the point where these facilities won't impede accomplishing what we want, is troubling to me. I have trouble with that. I'm completely on board with where we want to go in terms of personalized learning, more collaboration with students and between teachers. But it just, when I hear an answer like, we don't have more flow between the classrooms because none of the teachers, given their present practices and programs, asked for it or questioned it, that answer concerned me that, maybe the right things aren't driving the schematics.
If I may, I would say that, maybe to clarify Vaughn's statement about that, I think those discussions did come up. They didn't specifically talk about, well, I'm going to pair with this person. What they didn't want to be making decisions on a core planning team, which were representatives of staff and families, was that there shouldn't be, those people should not be making those decisions. Those should be made broader. And when we talked about certain extended learning spaces being in certain parts of the buildings, and we talked about maybe those teachers at a certain time in the future that are more conducive to and more flexible with that and more open to that should be, for that year, placed closer to those spaces until, because we know it's going to be a process to kind of help our staff evolve. And I think one of the things that I've been really learning about this, because I'm kind of linear sometimes in my thinking, is that this is not a linear process, and that there is going to be discussion going on at the same time. There's always going to be program discussion happening, and we need to create the flexibility in our spaces. And I for one, feel that there is a lot of flexibility built into this, even though a drawing might not reflect it. And I feel I can say that based on the conversations that were happening in those meetings. And if I might just add one more thing, that I also think that while we talk a lot about program driving facilities, and absolutely that should be the way when we get there and we do the construction and when we decide who's going to be in what part of the building, in a year or two, I think it's also about, until people see those spaces, it's hard to make those changes. And so there is sometimes a flip of, until you get in a space, and then suddenly the light bulb goes on. And so when they looked at visiting other schools, or when they looked at virtual tours, that's when their light bulbs started going on for them about what could be.
So you had said that decisions should be made by a broader group than the core planning team as the sum of the decisions. So what's our timeline for getting that feedback?
I think that's what comes in the next stage, as we're seeing now at the high school with those user group meetings. The schematics kind of placed, where things might go, and Vaughn can speak more specifically to that. But the user group discussions are, what exactly does that little corner of our world look like? And so what would that space look like? What do those extended learning spaces look like? What does the larger learning commons look like? Is it just an open space? Are there little pockets of spaces for people? Those are the discussions that happen in that next phase, because we really drilled into them that the point of this exercise and this phase was to say, are the big pieces where they need to be.
I wonder if part of where we're struggling is just that juxtaposition of having gone through the process of the high school design and then the elementary, because they are two obviously different ends of the spectrum. High school allowing much more independent learning options, and therefore it does flow more. We have more open learning spaces. What I remember from our conversation early on in the strategic planning process is that at elementary, it's not necessarily appropriate to have the priority on all student-driven choice. There is certainly student choice, but it's under it has a different structure to it. So that choice might be happening more in that environment with a teacher in a classroom, or a few instructors in that classroom, whereas it does open up as we progress through. And that's my interpretation. I don't know if that's the same as what other people are struggling with, but we could open these up. We could open up walls. We could have it flow across the hallways, as we've looked at for some of the middle school. I'm not sure if that would be appropriate in the elementary setting.
And I think what I'm struggling with is that because we haven't landed there, we don't necessarily know whether it's appropriate or not. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'm having this push and pull, because we have seen districts that do more of
Yes.
that at the elementary, and this doesn't quite get there.
But-
But maybe we can't afford it.
Well, I don't know, because if it's a matter of moving internal walls, as Vaughn pointed out, that can be supported by our current building design. So if we find that we need to flow in that direction, it sounds like we can adjust to that. What we wouldn't be able to go back and do is adding square footage to a building. So with the drawings at these sites, it appears that that conversation has been held, and looking at where's the most appropriate place and way to add space, that's been addressed. But internally, it sounds like we will continue to have those options probably through the next couple of decades. That particular option won't go away.
Correct. You know, I think part of our job in facilitating the design and the process is not to just take someone's statement about what it's like today and the statement of, well, we don't know how we'd share rooms, so don't do that, and to take that at face value and say, okay, well, we won't do it then. It's to really look at where your opportunities are and to think about and compare it to other schools we've designed, other groups that we've worked with and the issues they've brought up, and then to find subtle ways to question that, to push back on that, and to challenge that. So for example, as Leny pointed out, we do have an operable wall, an operable wall, an operable wall in these these groups of 4 classrooms. And that came as a result of saying, well, what if you wanted to do some large group teaching together? Well, we don't do that currently. Well, what if you did want to do that? How would you do that? Maybe if we were to put a wall between here that could collapse down and you get to that large group. Well, what kind of acoustics are going to be in that wall? They're great. We can get that wall to work in a way that's going to be the same as if we put a drywall insulated up between the classrooms. Well, does it have to be open all the time? No, it can be closed. It's very easy to work with so that if you want to open it up, you can. And pushing back to the point where we could get them to soften up on some of their statements of don't do it into, well, as long as I can do what I do today and I have the possibility to do it for the future, then I could go along with that. I could get on board with that. We talked a lot about visibility between the rooms and who can see in versus who can see out, and the fact that you're unlikely to use those personalized spaces unless you have some level of transparency and glass to happen there. We talked about, well, is that distracting for the kids or not distracting for the kids? And really working through a lot of those issues with the groups so that we know that we're designing in enough of those components and flexibility to give you that opportunity, whether or not the core planning teams have said we can envision that today, but pushing back and challenging a little bit to give you that level of flexibility that's designed in those spaces for the future.
Do you have an estimated cost for these items in relation to what has been set aside through the referendum?
I
Or are we
wouldn't
not
say
there
that
yet?
we've looked at the line item of saying exactly this is what this operable wall costs as much as we're working with Krause-Anderson on the overall approach for these. Having gone through the schematic design to this point, Krause-Anderson has taken a look at it. We've compared it to heavy renovation, light renovation, and looking at the scope of what we're doing to make sure that we're staying on budget for the amount allocated towards the elementary schools as a whole, as opposed to looking at individual line items. Until we get into the construction documents phase where we're drawing it out in detail, it's much more difficult for a cost estimator or construction manager to do linear line item takeoffs.
But if you look overall for the total estimated expense for these schematics, how does that relate to the dollars that have been set aside through the
We're on
referendum?
budget. I wouldn't.
Do we have any extra money?
No. Did I say that too fast?
That was a definitive response, thank you.
I think that we never want to bring something to, that we show you and go, this is completely beyond what we're capable of doing and have to scale back significantly. Obviously, we will get to those points where we have to look at balancing and saying, you know, we have to change a little bit here, we have to adjust the scope, but I believe for what we're showing, for what we've talked about with the teams, what we've talked about with construction managers, that we're presenting options that are achievable within the budgets that we have.
And I know this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that we are considering, because not everybody's getting done at the same time, that we are making sure that we're budgeting and allocating so that those at the end of the construction aren't going to get less because they're at the end.
That's one of the reasons that we're trying to work on a cohesive design approach and designing all the buildings simultaneously. Yes, it's a lot of work for the groups to get all together and to pull all the people at once, but it does allow us to look at from a phased approach, what are we doing, how is that going to be achieved, do we have the funds available for both summer 1 and summer 2, so that one group's not taking advantage of a situation and one group's going to get nothing left over. So that's why we're running our estimates as a whole as opposed to waiting until next summer to do another round of design.
So what is the next step then with these plans? And as I recall, with the high school, they were going to the next level of
Right.
design. Is that what would happen here?
That is absolutely what would happen. So at schematic design, where we are currently, it's very function-based in terms of the plans that you see. Things are represented more as two-dimensional diagrams and floor plans and site plans. At design development, we not only meet with the individual users of the space to lay out all the detail, where are the light switches, the power, how does it interface with what DMTS is doing, how do mechanical and electrical work into it, but we also start to develop the architecture more of the aesthetics, materials, the architectural design of the space. So we go from two-dimensional to three-dimensional at that point, work through all that level of detail. And that's really the design development is where, at the end of that phase, we're saying, this is the design. We can now proceed with construction documents to draw it in ways the contractors can bid off of. So schematic design gets the functional components in place. Design development looks at the detail and the design for it, and construction documents are just that, creating documents for the contractors to bid off of.
So the next step.
Anything else on elementary?
I do want to, we've asked a lot of questions. I know a huge amount of work's gone into this and do want to recognize it. And I think there's a lot about this that's exciting. And, you know, the questions are, I think, a reflection of how seriously we take it. We want it to be right. There's no criticism. And, you know, do want to recognize a lot of people did a lot of good work here. So thank you.
Yep. I second that.
Yeah. So is the intent is still to hopefully work on 3 elementaries this summer. Is that correct, Vaughn?
3 elementaries in summer 1, 3 elementaries in summer 2. The high school will be under construction both summers. The middle schools will have to wait until the second summer because we need to have a place for the 9th graders to go before we can start renovating those spaces where the 9th graders currently are. So a very heavy, intensive 2017, although 2016 is going to feel more intensive than anything we've been through today. So 2 tough summers in a row. Get ready for that.
And
That's
the
what
mid-
we've been telling every group.
And the middle schools are going through this process.
Middle schools are currently going through this process, as is early childhood.
Right.
Next, we're off to infrastructure improvement.
I'll let the wizard set up the next.
No, of course not. We knew that.
There we go. Hi. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about infrastructure improvements at the campuses. So, as you recall, no, my name is Von Dirks. I'm with Wold Architects and Engineers. Part of the process at both the East Campus and West Campus is that we have a lot of activities happening here. With both the high school and Valley View, we have a lot of cars and parking at this site. We have a lot of activities taking place, and a big part of the referenda was looking at not only the insides of the buildings, but the outsides as well. So our existing high school site, you can see all the different components here. The big one is the 70-foot hill from top to bottom. We also have very dense property lines, or excuse me, tight property lines that create a dense site as you come on board. There's an existing sanitary easement that moves through the site. But as we take a look at the different sites, I'd like to walk you through where we currently are in terms of site development. This has another layer that's currently being added in terms of separate consultants that have been brought on board to study pedestrian and bike traffic as well as vehicular traffic on site. Separate consultant to just look at parking counts. What we're currently approaching with the West Campus site is an additional 100 parking spaces, which is about a 10% increase in parking on site. We are looking at redefining how bus traffic works on the site. So creating one common bus corral to the east side of the site as we come in. This would create a new bus entry component for both the high school and Valley View for our bus riders coming into the building, as well as creating more appropriate entry space for them. As opposed to our ring road that currently moves around the north side of the site, this would expand and create more parking on the west side. You can see our addition to the building here. Turnaround point at the end here for service vehicles and emergency responders. And then all of the space, in addition to the 100 line spaces that would add to the site during the day, the bus corral is also going to be striped to pick up possibly an additional 50 to 100 spaces for events. So we're really increasing the site by 150 to 200 spaces as we move through. The final component to this, which is the next step for us to study, is our parent drop-off sequence along Valley View Road and how that will work in conjunction with changes the city is proposing to Valley View Road as we move forward. But this allows us to move the design into our water mitigation studies, working with 9 Mile Creek and the city responders in terms of looking at the sites as we move through. Our fields in this area are being replaced with synthetic turf to provide 2 additional lacrosse football fields in this area, and baseball will be striped over the tops of those fields. So synthetic turf in this area, and our proposed service access drive along the side of the hill coming down in. So this does provide pedestrian pathways, but not vehicular pathways along the north, vehicular service access drive along the east. It does not connect along the 2 neighborhoods for Creek Valley Road as we move through.
So Vaughn, when a bus pulls in, where are they going? Are they always going to the end and turning around?
It's going to go to the end and turn around and then queue up as they come back in. This design allows the buses to enter the site in whatever sequence they want. They don't have to arrive in a linear fashion, so bus 2 doesn't always have to follow bus 1. And at the end of the day, the first bus leaves the site, the rest follow suit and pull out, and this will exit the buses in one step. So we get our buses off the site as fast as possible so that our parents that are coming for pickup and our staff leaving the site are held until the buses are off site.
Where do parents pick up?
Currently,
them at
parents
this
pick up
location?
along the east side, or excuse me, the west side of the building, but we know that this is problematic, and so this site does not have the parent sequence redesigned into this right now. We mostly are concerned with getting our parking and turf and roads determined so that we can move forward with the water, stormwater management plans for our regulatory agencies. So in terms of a step in the construction, that's a long review window, and we needed to get to that point first before we reorganize this part of the site.
And where is high school drop-off? I realize it's not designed yet, but
High
where's the
school
thinking?
drop-off actually moves along this part of the site, so this is our new main door coming into the site, and we're queuing more people up along this point. If you remember, currently, drop-off revolves around a small turnaround point right about here, and so we're eliminating that small point and creating a much larger queue area and sequencing people back off the site in that loop as they move through.
But you still have sidewalks next to the building.
We still have sidewalks next to the building. We're still working with our consultant on bike traffic, bike parking, and pedestrian routes alongside the building as well. One of the things this site plan does do in order to maximize our parking, look at use on site, is currently we have our tennis courts in this location. This is relocating tennis to Creek Valley. So our tennis courts now will have more direct parking adjacent to it. It will be more of a community-based component as opposed to where they're currently located, so more people can use those. It's within walking distance for the PE program, and it takes place on an area of the site that's currently underutilized for Creek Valley, and so this would relocate tennis to the Creek Valley site.
So these tennis courts are along Gleason and not up where there are currently city tennis courts?
Correct.
Oh, they're on Gleason?
So how do you get there from the high school?
From the high school, there's a pathway that works in conjunction with 9 Mile Creek and connects back to Creek Valley in this part of the site.
you
So it's a
maybe
walk.
Walk around the back and then back up front.
Yep.
Quarter mile.
So they're not anticipated to be used during the day?
If they would be used during the day, they said that they would likely use a shuttle if they needed to get over to that point, which is what they currently do for other off-site activities. And the tennis is a pretty small unit of the PE component. And so in terms of looking at an overall picture and a district-wide approach, activities felt that that was
As did the curriculum.
as did the curriculum for location of that was an appropriate location to consider.
They preferred the turf on site versus the tennis courts.
Okay.
And it's supported by the activities program, and the tennis program obviously has been communicated with on this too.
Okay.
Is that space where the tennis courts are going, is that space that the elementary school uses for anything during the day, or is part of their programming?
No, they actually use more of the sites that are developed in the northeast part of the site.
It's used by the park system.
Right.
And actually, when you start looking at the turf we're adding and the opportunities, there's your trade-off. And so we'd be recognizing their trade-off, and this is not, again, it's common practice that those suburban schools that are trying to rebuild, you just have to do some of your large group space, activity space off campus. And this is actually a pretty convenient location. We think it's also, again, balances out some of the traffic flow, and there's some opportunities here with summer camps when we have that grass, and we'll now have tennis camps and some of that. There's just a better flow, not even during the school seasons, but also during the summer.
Can I just ask about restroom facilities? When we move this all here, where are we directing people for camps and?
So there
Continued
is
use of portable facilities.
And we also are right across the street from City
Okay.
Park.
One of the things the MDE often looks at when we are studying referenda and site use and looking at site size is in urban areas, like you're set in. What other adjacent land do you have in terms of parks, and what contiguous land do you have with other district property? And the fact that we have contiguous property between Creek Valley and the high school, we felt it was important to really explore the use of that and to look at it as a whole site development as opposed to simply limiting us to the land to the south of the hill at the high school.
So is that used for soccer right now?
Youth soccer, it's not a full soccer field.
Right, no, I definitely use soccer. I just remember driving past there and seeing.
Yep, that's correct.
So then they'll go to.
Well, we're adding turf fields, we're rebuilding West Campus fields, so.
Part of the work that we'll be doing, we'll also be looking at how the lower fields are grassed. So we've got available grass fields.
And we know we'll be able to control those grass fields as well, so that if we can have quiet seasons for them. One of the problems we had with our current grass field was we never had a down season.
Say, somebody asked me recently in the last couple of months, now that we're looking at all this additional turf fields, there apparently was some issues with the fill that's in the fields, with these artificial turf fields, and are we at least researching what fill is in there and if there's any negative components in it?
We're always trying to
to
stay on
health.
top of that. This isn't the only district that is putting in synthetic turf, and so we're always looking at that with our civil engineers. A lot of the issues around synthetic turf came out of the East Coast, where they were first developed and put in, and they're decade-old plus. And so that's not to say that there aren't issues. There's microclimate issues that you have to be aware of, especially around hydration of athletes. It's warmer on the turf fields than on natural grass fields, and so that has to be an awareness. But they have changed the fill component. They've looked at how they deal with that. The last thing the turf industry wants is to have those issues as well. And so they're constantly looking at how they improve the quality of their field to make sure that they don't have those issues. As we move to the East Campus, if you remember, we're rebuilding the track as part of the referenda. We're replacing the turf on the stadium as part of long-term deferred maintenance, and we're converting the Upper McCarthy fields into synthetic turf fields as well in this location. Currently, we're exploring options around the baseball field. Do we relocate it? Do we move it further to the south versus do we simply provide turf at the infield to provide a playable surface even in stormwater management items? If you remember, the outfield for this is a joint use would probably be the most polite way to describe it. And then as we look at the stadium, relocating discus and shot into this area and working with Concord to make sure that we have a safe facility in that area with fencing and shared use as well. And the turf baseball field could be used by Concord during the day.
They also felt that the East Fields would be available to the Concord FIAD program as well as the Normandale program.
So again, maximizing the fact that we have a 3-building campus here and looking at it as a contiguous campus as opposed to simply one elementary site or a middle school site.
Do the fact the fields are east-west limit their ability to be used for games?
Those really are intended to be more practice facility or lower level sports games, and they don't fit north-south, so east-west is our only configuration that's possible.
And the parking lot holds sort of its current capacity?
Parking lot holds its current capacity, although I will say that just like the other elementary schools, we're looking at our parent drop-off sequence. Parents are often the most difficult people to retrain, and so we want to make it as intuitive as possible. So we may end up making some parking lot changes to this area. We're also, as part of the middle school, examining the bus drop-off sequence and parent drop-off sequence, and with early childhood, our early childhood drivers. So this campus is, despite having fewer students than the West Campus with Valley View and the high school, it's more complicated. It's a little bit more convoluted and has many issues around it. So we're just now getting into developing the overall east traffic patterns as we look at the site.
We recognize that both East and West Campus, that we're still in the evolution of how those will be presented to the board, but those will be coming back to the board in December, along with the elementary programming. We'll also be updating the board on some of the middle school work being done in early childhood in December. We also know we have a safety and security proposal that we'll be presenting to the board as we move all of our projects going forward. And Susan, what am I missing on?
High school design
High school.
update.
Yep. So everything, we're still on schedule with everything we're doing, and appreciate Vaughn and his team have been very thorough in their work, very responsive. They always bring a team of 3 to 4 players out to help make sure this gets done and then respond immediately with follow-up. So I think it's keeping us on a tight time schedule. And again, thanks to the staff and the parents and the students who've been involved, and Susan Brott for all her coordination work with this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had one last question. When is the timing of the turf? Is that first summer, second summer, or a combo of the two?
Right now, we're actually working with the civil engineers and the installers of turf fields to try and determine how much work is happening in the state right now. There's limited installers for turf fields, and we don't want to be bidding in a time where we're creating our own problem. And so we're trying to figure out how that works, how it works around practice schedules, and make sure that it may not be that all the turf fields get done at the same time. We might do some this summer, might do some next summer. So we're still working through that issue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Vaughn.
Next up is our action portion of this evening's meeting. The first item is the World's Best Workforce Report, 2014-15. Can I get a motion to bring that to the floor?
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded to bring the World's Best Workforce Report that's been for presentation. Rick?
Randy Smazel and Donna Roper and Mary Manderfield are our key players, but there's a whole team of task force members who've been involved in the World's Best Workforce. This is, again, the legislation that has been put in place to continue with that level of accountability at a district level back to the state and the Department of Education. And with that, I turn over to Randy and team.
Good evening, Chair Meyer, Superintendent Dressen, school board members, and community of Edina Public Schools. We are very fortunate to have here this evening some members of our World's Best Workforce Committee. So on my left, we have a student from Edina High School, Madison Seeley. She is the world's best workforce of the future. And we have Carolyn Jackson, one of our parents that are on the committee, Donna Roper, our Director of Research and Evaluation, and Mary Manderfeld, our Director of Equity and Enrollment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn to give us just a little bit of background about the World's Best Workforce and the committee, and then it'll slide to Donna.
All right, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Good evening. I'm very pleased to work on the World's Best Workforce Committee. It's a good committee with a broad section of community members and staff members. In 2013, the legislature passed a bill called the World's Best Workforce, and it looks at key development sections of a child's life and how our schools making sure that each of these key development places, our kids are ready to move on to the next level. So first, are they ready for school, pre-K? Are all third graders reading at third grade level? Are the racial gaps diminishing down to 0? When the kids are ready to go out, are they ready for career in college? And finally, what's our graduation rate? So that's what the legislation requires us to look at. How do we do that? Well, fortunately, Edina had a lot of this in place already, and it was more a matter of alignment than it was of creating any new programs. So the World's Best Workforce was originally the Student Achievement Committee, and we took a lot of things, and Randy put a lot of time into this, that the district was already doing and aligning them with the new goals of this legislation. And so we spent a lot of 2014 and 2015 working on what do we have, how do we present it, how do we make it accessible to the public and align it with these goals. And now, having done that, we're at the stage where it's time to start reporting what we've done. And that's what tonight's presentation is about.
So I'm going to share with you some results for each of these 5 strategic areas. And these are not by any means done, cooked, baked. They're in the beginning stages. We're developing. And so we'll look forward to more discussions each year as we work on this. So the first area is all students ready for K. And we had in 2014-15, 70% of all of our students in the early childhood special education programs between the ages of 3 and pre-K meeting appropriate literacy learning expectations as measured by the Teaching Strategies Gold Assessment. Once those kiddos came to us in kindergarten, the 4-year-olds, over 74% of them met the early literacy screening benchmarks in the fall. And this will be a year where we work really closely with our early childhood folks in the district, establishing goals for 15-16 and putting in place data collection for us to report out. The next area is 3rd grade.
So any context there? Is that compared to prior years, or have we not been doing the same assessment?
So I think the GOLDS is new, and early childhood outcomes are a big deal, and every district is going to be required to put together kindergarten entry profiles for their students, and this is a year where a lot of that work is being defined. So we'll have more on that as we go forward. I don't think this is inconsistent with what's been happening. I think it's probably I feel like this is a really good place for us to be. And I have to be honest, I don't know what the historical trend is on this. We'd have to put that together, and we could. But that would be another.
Just trying to get a sense, so that's good.
And do we know how this compares with other districts? Is this a good result?
Not at this time. I don't know that. So this is fairly new for all districts, and we'll start to get more on it as districts report.
My question was, the 70% 3 to pre-K, how many of our kids actually come into the school are we getting access to there? Are we missing some groups pre-K before they come in?
And I really have to apologize because I don't know the answer to that. I think our early childhood folks are the folks we need to talk to about some of those details, if that's okay.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm just curious, the 70% enrolled in I know it's ECSE programs. We were
Right.
looking at all of the kids enrolled in ECFE as well.
And my understanding is that these are the kids that we assessed were our early childhood special ed students with the GOLDS because it was about servicing academic needs.
So you can see this is an evolving field.
Yep.
I mean, we're still at the legislative level, still determining what early childhood is and how does that line up with the 3- and 4-year-old programs. So, talking to my colleagues, this is where we're at. This is a brand-new field of study. And even the data that we're looking at, Donna is working very closely with MDE and other colleagues to say what is critical data going forward. So it is an early part of this journey.
Right. Or even how we partner with private
That's correct.
programs
That's correct.
instead of us doing all the evals maybe.
And there's a lot of debate going on. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. The next big goal area is 3rd grade. We want to share with you some data points on our 3rd grade reading proficiency scores. And we have MCA, which is a metric that the state requires us to report for this. And you can see 75.8% of our 3rd graders met proficiency on the MCA. And then they also are asking us to break it down by demographic group. And so that's what we have here. And for our 15-16 target, we are looking to increase it by a minimum of just under 3% or 3% or over. We're putting minimums in for district goals.
What does on roll mean? I'm just
Those are the number of students enrolled.
enroll. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Enrolled.
2013 prior, that's just the data from 2013. And then what does 2014 baseline mean?
So that's the baseline year that was used for the integration, achievement and integration plan, which Mary's going to talk about next.
So the 2013 to 2014 numbers, those are both actual numbers?
Correct. Yep. The next data point on 3rd grade that we have is related to our MAP proficiency and growth. And again, on the day that students took this in the spring, you can see we had a little over, just under 72% of the students proficient on the MAP. And we have it broken out by demographic group for you there to see as well. And then the number of students meeting projected growth targets was 53.4%. And that is, we would expect our kids to be in the 50 to 60% range. And so we're making goals for 15-16 to say we would like to increase our proficiency on MAP by 5 points as well as our growth targets, looking for a 5-point increase.
Is there something unusual, and maybe it's changed with the map? So for a while, the map sort of had 50% are going to meet targets when they normed it, and 50% weren't going to meet. Has that been changed?
So the way the projected targets work is they are an estimate of a projected growth target. We would expect to see our kids in the 50 to 60% range.
Okay.
And so that's just the normative nature. I mean, that's the nature of a normative assessment. So you're correct, Lisa.
Can you just help me understand the difference between these two tests or these two studies? Because I was looking at the packet and, say, our black students. So I look at the first chart, which was, they were 41%, and then we went up to 44.8, and then 52.8. But then I look at this next chart, which I think the one you have is more active than the one in the packet, and the last column shows only 20.5%.
Right.
So
So
I don't understand how to look at the 2 points of data.
they are a test that's taken at a point in time. And at the point in time that we gave the map, and also it's a normed test, which is different than the MCA, which is criterion referenced. So these tests assess different things. So that's one thing. One assesses the Minnesota State standards. The other assesses how kids are doing in comparison to their grade level peers. It's a normative test. And so I really can't explain exactly why our black students performed one way on the MCA versus another way on the norm. It'll take some digging, and that is what our sites are doing. They have this data at a very detailed level. They're looking at individual students, they're looking at their growth, they're looking at their proficiency, and they're figuring out what they need to do to move these kids for the next test. So.
And were they given at similar points in time, or?
They are one right after the other. So the MCA comes first and the map is given after that in the spring.
Can we get a follow-up on what we're finding on that, just to help us?
Happy to do that.
Also understand it's a pool of 29, so
For the MAP test, I think it was, yeah, like 39 kids that took the test.
So a small can.
Right, but still, I mean, when you see the differences, I'm just wondering, what
Volatile
what
with
does it mean? What should we be doing?
Yep.
To, when you see a difference that big in the two tests, I'm just wondering what's going on.
Yeah, right. That's a good question. So the next goal area, I'm going to pass it over to Mary. She's going to talk about that.
Good evening. As you remembered, we wrote a 3-year achievement and integration plan. We had to write an achievement goal which was related to reading. So the achievement goal related to reading was the proficiency gap between white students enrolled for the full-time academic year for all grades tested within Edina Public Schools in reading on all state reading accountability will decrease by increasing the proficiency of our Hispanic, Black, and free and reduced price meal students. So we were not looking at our special ed students, we weren't looking at our LEP students. They're listed on here as points of reference, but the categories that we really want to focus on are those that have a meets target yes or no. We did not meet target in any area, although you will see that we did show some gains with our Hispanic students, our Black students, our Asian students. We did have slight decreases with our white and free and reduced price meal students. And this is a 3-year goal. So we are supposed to decrease the gap within the next 3 years. So we have a new target for 15-16, we'll have a new target for 16-17. The way the Minnesota Department of Education is now asking schools to report are, has the goal been achieved? Have you made significant progress? Have you made some progress, not making progress, or other? So in that category, for our achievement piece, you can see we've made some gains in the target populations that our plan was addressing. Any questions about this particular slide?
What are the numbers?
Yeah.
That is the rate of proficiency. So we are
No,
again.
I'm sorry, Mary, I'm not being clear. How many students?
Yeah.
What grades?
Yeah, that was sort of what.
Well, it's all grades of students taking reading, the reading assessment. So again, it's all state reading accountability assessments. So we test in grades 3, we test in grades.
This is grade 3 here. This is or actually, this is all grades. Yeah.
And we give the,
All grades. The gap reflects all students who are assessed on the MCA.
So we sort of have a difference between what the state's requiring us to report versus what's really helpful, it sounds to me, in terms of changing instruction. Is that valid? Because I don't know if 3rd grade is actually making a lot of gains and 12th grade isn't, or 3rd grade is, or when it's when it's all, I don't know what to make of this really, in terms of how to help our students make gains.
Right. And I think we're not the only district kind of dealing with this mandated sort of required formula to show progress. So
So is this chart one that's basically designed to comply with what the state is
That's correct.
requiring? So this is not designed to give us information about how a particular grade is performing. It's simply, World's Best Workforce says you got to fill in these data points. Whether you can use it, who knows, but these are the data points, so that if we keep asking you questions that don't relate to these charts, you need to come on a different day. Is that
That would be
a
correct.
fair statement?
you know, and I think, Lisa, to your point, that is a
That would be
goal and a
correct.
challenge we continue to have, is that we need to close gaps. And so, again, are we making the progress we want to? Absolutely not. We did make some gains, slight gains in a couple areas that we are measuring, but we continue to need to do better. And we are measuring the gap per MDE based on our white students against other groups, when in fact in Edina, our highest performing groups are our Asian groups. So again, per what we're required to report is how our students are doing in relation to our white students, because typically across other districts, that seems to be the highest performing group.
Yeah, so Randy, go ahead.
I would just add that We are given a template from MDE to complete as part of this report, and so we've completed that template and we are presenting it to you. And so the format might not always facilitate our deep understanding of what's going on, but it's meant to be in summary in nature.
And I heard reference to the 2016 targets now will be adjusted, or are those our current targets?
Those should be our current targets. We should not be adjusting anything. This is based on the data we have.
Okay, so they don't, based on your results in year one, they don't readjust the follow-on years, or they do? Okay, okay.
You're always readjusting your targets based on realized results, which is what we did here, which is what you're seeing. Okay, so these are the targets based on
The new
what we are,
targets.
required to do.
Thank you.
Okay, the next piece is our achievement goal. So again, we had to write an achievement goal. So our achievement goal, and that is not the, I apologize, that is not the slide you should have in front of you. I think you were given a copy of a different slide, but let me speak to what you have. So our integration goal was really related to the retention of students that are part of our Minneapolis transportation program. And so in the, our baseline data we had 167 students that were part of our Minneapolis transportation student program. 15 of them graduated, which gave us a pool of 152 to try and retain for the following year. So in 14-15, we did retain 132 students, which was a, you have it up now, thank you, which was a almost an 87% retention rate. I'm happy to report, though, that with 2014-15, we retained 155 out of 160. So if you compare 2014-15 to retained, you can see in our white we had 15 students part of the program. 12 of those 15 students are now back in our schools this year. Our Asians, 2 of 3. Our Hispanic was 27 of 39. Our Black, 114 out of 30. We had 27 that graduated, so the population, again, was 160 that could have been retained, and we retained 155. If you look then, what does new in 2015-16 means? That means what are our new numbers? Because I think there are two pieces. How are we retaining the students that are presently part of our program? And then how are we increasing access for those students? So does this provide any questions? Questions about this particular chart? So again, the integration is how are we partnering to increase access to our schools?
So we could have retained 155, but now we're serving 180, so we've actually increased.
Yes, well, actually, we could have retained 160 if you
I'm
look
sorry.
at, yep,
Yes,
and
yes,
we
yes,
did
sorry.
retain
Yep.
155.
Yep.
But we've actually increased the number of students we're serving this year.
To
So I think
180.
there's really two pieces.
Yeah.
How are we retaining the students that are part of the program for multiple years and getting them to graduation? And how are we increasing that number of students?
And we're just looking at students who are part of the Minneapolis transportation.
Yes, because one, that is part of Minneapolis, which is, and it used to be called the Choice is Yours program. So the qualifier to be part of Minneapolis transportation is you have to qualify for free and reduced price meals. And then we provide transportation to them to come to Edina Public Schools.
Okay.
Thank you.
The fourth big goal area, is career and college readiness, and you've seen some of this data already. Our ACT scores are maintaining very high scores. We had additional students testing on ACT, but this slide I believe everybody has already seen, and it's one we're sending in with our report. The next slide.
So can I just, so this was the year everyone took it, correct?
This is our seniors. This is how our seniors across the system.
You're correct.
Yeah, I'm just,
Yep.
so
It was
we
all
didn't
stu-
really see much of a drop considering we now went to universal
No.
testing.
Right.
Because that's what I was asking.
Right.
But this data is not about the seniors. This is about the seniors. All juniors took it last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's sort of what I was
curious about, sorry, okay. So it's still not everybody taking it?
So the
is
next
what you're
slide,
saying.
the next slide will show you
Yeah.
everybody. We added that for you. And what you'll see here, and this is just phenomenally good data, you guys. Our students are performing really well on this academic preparedness measure for college readiness. Over 71% meeting the math benchmark, and more than 69% meeting the reading benchmark. And on a statewide level, it's they're in the 50s where they're meeting this benchmark. So Edina students are performing really well on the academic preparedness metric called the ACT. But in saying that, we also recognize that it is only one indicator of preparedness for college and life. And so I think we, at this point, maybe want to hear from...
Yeah, maybe we can hear from Madison to get just a perspective of what it's like to be a student at Edina High School, and what are some of the other opportunities to learn that don't always get demonstrated on a high-stakes assessment like the ACT, et cetera.
Okay, hi. As Randy just introduced, I'm Madison. I'm currently a senior at Edina High School, and I guess I'm here to elaborate on what it's like to be an Edina student. So, I think that my high school career, as many people perceive, like me, is that it's really based on numbers, and I think in response to that, I chose to write a research paper, my passion project, if you guys are familiar with that term, my sophomore year, about basically the shortcomings of standardized testing. And what I actually, interestingly enough, that actually did lead me to this group, so I guess it was a positive thing in the end. I think what was really interesting coming out of that is I find that a lot of high schools end up using these standardized tests to really define the intelligence and define the college preparedness of students, and in short, that's really not effective. And doing some, I guess, relationship work between what Edina does in comparison to like the regular trend with the system, I actually feel like Edina does really a good job, I guess, of kind of differentiating themselves from academic preparedness and character preparedness. I think that Edina does a lot in regards to making sure that students' test scores are at the best that they can possibly be, and obviously I'm really lucky to be in an institution where that is the case. However, I do think that they have a really high regard for other skills such as social, emotional, intelligence, the power of communication, I think are really honed in classrooms, and I don't know if that's really intentional, but these are definitely skills that I've obtained. And I think that there's also a really big push for participation in extracurriculars to further kind of refine those skills that you're learning in the classroom, and I think that's such a wonderful opportunity. I mean, going to the activities fair earlier this year, we have clubs in everything. So it's really a great opportunity to find an area that interests you and really develop yourself with these skills that really do provide better life opportunities for you. So, I mean, ranging from anything from modern day slavery to math team, there's an opportunity for everyone. As someone who was not satisfied with all the offerings at the time, I did start my own club. And I can vouch for the ease of that process, which I guess further hints at Edina's true commitment to allowing students to engage with their passions and really give them the best opportunity to learn these necessary skills before going out into the world. So, as someone who really loves her extracurriculars, thank you for this opportunity. So,
What club did you start?
oh, I started Amnesty International. I was inspired by Model United Nations, which is another club that I participate in, and I kind of wanted, more of a direct avenue to solving international problems, whereas I feel like Model UN was more like hypothetically how could we solve them, and so I was really drawn to Amnesty's kind of more direct grassroots organization kind of type in dealing with these problems. So I thought that was a really great experience, and I would highly recommend. So, yeah.
Thank you, Madison, for a very articulate painting of your experience. Donna?
Then the last category is graduation rates, and you can see we have a very high percentage of our students graduating. But our goal for 15-16 is to increase graduation rates for our demographic groups that aren't graduating at the highest rates, our EL, English language learners, special ed, free and reduced price lunch, Black and Hispanic students. We are looking to increase their graduation rates at a minimum of 4.5 points for next year. That's our goal.
Again, this is the World's Best Workforce Report, and our goal is to create graduates that are ready for a globally diverse, rapidly changing environment. A couple of slides summarizing Minnesota's job outlook, some worker tasks in the U.S. economy, and how the jobs that require routine cognitive work are shifting. And so our goal, again, is to put in place the elements that are indicating to us that we're preparing our students for the future that they're going to experience. And with that, we'll take any questions before we close.
Questions? Thank you all. Great work.
Thank you all for staying so late tonight to present. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And I just want to publicly thank Mary, Donna, and Carolyn, and Madison for all of the work and being part of the World's Best Workforce Committee. Thank you.
And again, I would affirm this is a state report that we have to fit into that box. It's still important, but also what we are building is a dashboard that will go to staff that is documentation so that this data is at the staff's, on the staff screen. We're building one also for the board and district level too, so you'll have this live screen growing as well. And Donna and Steve are working hard on bringing that forward in 2016. So that is the world's best workforce, and it is an action item.
Excellent. So we've got a motion on the floor. Any additional questions or comments?
I don't think we have a motion.
We don't have we didn't make a motion.
We did.
Oh, we did?
We presented it before we.
It's a late night, but I caught that one. Additional questions, comments? All those in favor of approving the World's Best Workforce Report 2014-15 as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next before us is the purchase of Student Information System Program of software products from Infinity Campus. Can I have a motion to bring that one to the floor?
So moved. Second.
So moved and seconded to approve the purchase of a student information system of software from Infinity Campus for $97,000 for year one and $75,000 annually thereafter. Steve, you want to walk us through?
Certainly. Good evening, Superintendent Dressen and Dinah board members. In May, as I mentioned previously, TIES, which is our current information system provider, decided to cease development of their student information system. This provided us actually an opportunity to evaluate what is going to be the next student information system that we're looking for, not only to meet our today's need, but to meet a lot of the next generation learning and the personalization of learning. In order for us to really make sure that a proper decision was being made, we developed a number of stakeholder groups. These stakeholder groups comprised our teachers, elementary, secondary, our power users, the folks that move data back and forth, our administrators, and our parents and students. We conducted a number of evaluations, and at the end of the day, Infinite Campus rose to the top with those groups. Not only that, our administration met a number of times with the leadership of Infinite Campus to talk about our next generation, talk about our idea of personalized learning and competency-based learning to ensure that we were in alignment with our direction, and we were able to modify this contract to make sure that those criteria were put into the contract. So I'm recommending the moving to Infinite Campus. This does mean a big change for the organization, but we think that this is going to be a change that's going to position the district to be able to foundation of the data in order to move forward on next generation learning.
Thanks, Steve. And you have in front of you an amendment, and the change took a notice of 30 days by either party and increased that to 12 months. So we aren't stuck in the middle of the school year missing our system. And that already has been incorporated into the document on the floor. Any questions or comments?
Can you just give me a comparison of, I mean, we don't have ties, but the cost difference, is it a significant jump? What are we looking at in terms of operating expenses with the new system?
No, it's actually a savings.
To hear that, okay. Thanks.
And then in reference to the $75,000 annually after the first year, any anticipation that that would need to adjust one way or the other if our needs change or if there's a need for increase on their behalf?
It's a great question. The cost is associated with enrollment, so if we do have an increase or decrease in enrollment, we should see our prices fluctuate based on enrollment. Also, they do development work, so if we wanted to do some custom development that's not in the product, we can seek assistance. And that was one of the, I think, the contributing factors of looking at Infinite Campus is they're a willing partner. They're very excited about our vision of next generation learning and very interested in partnering with us to help make that a reality. As they've mentioned, we're not the only school district that's looking at how do we leverage the tool, technology and information to really help us move along this continuum of standards-based learning. And so they're very excited to work with us as well.
Steve, I sometimes really have fun reading these contracts, but this wasn't one of them. So do we have legal review these things? I mean, what's the process for reviewing the language in these contracts and whether they're good, bad, or indifferent?
That's a great question. So first, I review it, which is, I suppose, okay. But then we did have legal review that, and we went back and forth with Infinite Campus and our legal team a number of times to come up with the language that would be acceptable to our attorneys and to our organization. And indeed, just this evening, we made this last-minute change to move from a 30-day to a 12-month. And so it is a process of working back and forth and making sure that we comply to state laws, as well as making sure that we have a contract that's going to serve us going forward.
Steve, I also want to mention that you work closely with other school districts, and we know of 2 other school districts using this same product line. And so we were able to compare how their contracts were developing and evolving as to ours. So, and they had legal eyes on it as well. So I think we've had more than just one set of legal eyes on it indirectly.
Yeah, the world is evolving where Infinite Campus is one of the largest student information systems, and so a number of our neighboring school districts use this tool right now. And so I think it'll be a great opportunity for us to learn from our neighbors as we start converting to Infinite Campus and start leveraging that in our educational systems.
And what is their total installed base at this point? Do you have a sense how many districts are using this system nationwide?
I don't, but I believe there's over 8 million students that are using it. And so Infinite Campus is the largest U.S. student information system in the country. So there is a larger British one from Power School, but they are the largest one. They are located locally, and so they're located north of the Twin Cities. And the owner, Charlie, got his start as a ties coordinator, actually, and is a person that's local. So though they're large, they have they're local, and so the ability for us to tap them as we start moving forward will be something that we can take advantage of.
So looking at the scores, some interesting things pop out. Number one is the data export, import. Is that just preference, or is that some real technology issues there? And also we have this big jump in schedulers and counselors and admin. You know, they're always causing problems. So just curious what the real differences were there once you looked at it.
Firstly, I want, like Gwen mentioned earlier, the design team that was made up of Marilyn Cuppy, Diane Morris, Peg Wickland, and myself, they did just a fantastic job of developing the criteria that we need in order to make sure that the product is being evaluated on real-world scenarios. And so the schedulers, counselors, and admin, Infinite Campus is really known for a powerful scheduling tool. And so as we start looking at how to develop flexible schedules and how to be able to run a schedule daily or weekly, it was a really powerful tool, and it was a lot of excitement from the secondary schools. The data import and export, that's the folks that are really familiar with ties right now. And this is using SQL technology, which is the modern way to move information back and forth. And I think they were looking at from a tool set that they weren't as familiar with, but it is the industry standard. Since then, though, that same team has gone to some SQL training, has gone to other districts that use Infinite Campus, and they've come back reassured, I think that the ability to move information in and out of that system is going to be something they can do. The other thing I will say, though, is TIES has been an incredible partner for us, and so they were always a phone call away. They were a smaller organization, and we were a big partner with that group. And so Infinite Campus is a larger organization, and so there will be some of that trade-off of being able to pick up a phone and talk to the programmers right within TIES. Whereas with Infinite Campus, they have a very mature product, but we're going to be someone that's going to have discussions and work with them to ensure that we get the things we need. And hence, that's why we put into the contract some of those conditions to make sure that we're able to have our voice heard.
Excellent. Additional questions or comments? All those in favor of approving the purchase of Student Information System Program software products from Infinity Campus as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, we've got schedule review of policy 629. Can I get a motion to bring that to the floor?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve our schedule review of policy 629, student fundraising. We've seen this before. Who'd like to start?
There's primary changes in this are in section 8, just reworking it to clarify the language, clean it up, align it with actual practice for fundraising events on site.
But no changes from the last time we saw it, right? From what I
There,
can tell.
section 8 is,
Oh,
sorry, section 8, yes.
It's 10.
No, that's all right, it's,
No, we cleaned up Section 8. Section 8 was combining a couple of different ideas, and so that's cleaned up a little bit since the last time you saw it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? So I've got just a clarifying question because I was bringing up other groups. So is the line completely clear at who's covered under 629 versus 630?
629 is student fundraising, only done by students at the sites.
right, 630 is addressing community organizations and boosters. Are we understanding your question correctly?
Yeah, but I'm trying to make sure the line is clear. So band is where?
The booster band. Booster band, it's, in fact, 630 is changed to where it's now 913. So that would be where band fundraising would belong. So student fundraising, an example of student fundraising would be a student activities group who wants to raise funds for another nonprofit, possibly in terms of awareness of world hunger, awareness of a need that exists. So the student group organizes an activity to collect those funds. It could also be part of bringing in a group like Feed My Starving Children, but that's not organized by an outside booster group. So this is directly related to activity.
Student-driven.
Correct.
And student-driven is typically some type of service learning project.
It's specifically in the definitions and in the purpose of the policy is limited to a student group or student organization. So it would take out the
You
bigger
know, like I
groups.
see music there and I confuse that with band, right? With band booster.
Yep,
So
and
that's-
so a booster, anything that is not a student would be parent or booster organization, and that would belong in 913.
So now 630 is 913? Is that what you said? But in the purpose,
Well, that's
we
what I
refer
have
to
in my
we refer to policy 630 then. So
Well, I'm referencing my policy chart, so I'm wondering, the policy chart says that 913 used to be 630. I believe, what I remember, and this was 2014 when we reviewed that, but the change, I believe, was made in 2013, and we had some redundancies, so we combined them. So that's probably a friendly amendment to clean up the reference to 913.
in the purpose paragraph. Or, yeah.
Change it from 630 to 9.
Am I accurate, though?
Is that right?
Well,
Or-
on
We
our,
still
on our
have
web, on our website, we still have 6:30 as community organizations, parent
So again,
organizations, and booster
I'm referring to
clubs.
my policy chart, so this is,
That was before we compressed them, I believe.
And your policy chart says what?
that 6:30 and 9:13 were,
We no longer show a 9:13.
so it went the other way.
It went the other way.
There we go. So it's correct. We no longer have a 9:13. We used to,
Never mind then.
So
but
are-
now we have a 6:30.
So are the
We still
pol-
have that.
Are the policies on 319 on the bottom there, the 900 policies, are those still correct, or have those numbers been modified as well?
Which, are you referring to?
4.
That number 4,
4A.
equal opportunity and harassment?
Just ask.
Those are correct.
Those are all correct.
Okay. Any additional discussion? All those in favor of approving revised policy 629, student fundraising, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Information, announcements.
Just again to congratulate Sarah Patzloff, Leny, Wallen-Friedman, and Amir Garvey for their new duties as they begin January 1, 2016. The election board did approve the results of those elections earlier this month. Board was at West Side School District down in Omaha, Nebraska, a team of board members, and I traveled down there to take a look at our partnership efforts there. We are active right now in a variety of venues. It's parent-teacher conference time, so that's an important time, and really looking at some creative ways that we continue to make sure our families are engaged fully in their child's learning opportunities. We've got some good things going on there. And earlier this evening, we did have a very nice annual event where we recognized the National Merit Scholars. We had over 40 National Merit Scholars that we're celebrating in 2015, and it's a time where they step up and recognize a teacher that has made a difference in their lives and tell a quick story of that impact. It's a very wonderful community celebration, and we thank the students and the staff for their great work, as well as everybody involved to make that a success story.
Thank you, Rick. Any other additional items, committee reports, other information? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn at this time?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn our meeting. Any objection to adjourning at this time? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all.